That's all I got to rely on, being a simple-minded son of a bitch. Rickover gave me my command, a checklist, a target, and a button to push. All I had to know is how to push it. They'd tell me when. They seem to want you to know why.
I would hope they'd want us all to know why, sir.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film. We explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris. I am a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Rocha. I'm a writer, producer, host, and voiceover artist here in San Diego, California.
And the thing that keeps the mics running and the digital systems recording and the editing and the researching is all our incredible supporters on patreon.com/thecine-files, as well as Apple Podcasts. On Apple Podcasts, you get to listen to ad-free versions of the show, as well as our Cine-Files shorts. And spoiler alert, we just recorded what was supposed to be a short on Andor and The Last of Us that ended up as a debate about the differences between cinema and television, and if there is in fact a difference. You can guess which side each of us were on in that debate. We will be talking about Andor and Last of Us very soon, and the only place you can hear those is through Apple Podcasts or at patreon.com/thecine-files.
Oh, and another way you can keep supporting our show is when you listen to these commercials and you hear the clients that support us and the companies that support us. We'd love it if you wanted to try out their products, and please try out their products. We do not allow anyone to be promoting anything on our show that we don't at least believe in, support, or have tried. So we encourage you all to try everything. You know, currently Awaken 180 is a big deal that's going on. I've lost 30 pounds now, Steve, on Awaken 180. So if some of you are really considering losing weight, want to tackle it once and for all, Awaken 180 is another one of our sponsors here. But we have so many that have come on with us over the last few years of the show that we've really enjoyed. So if the products stick out to you, please use our code so that you can get a great discount, and you can let them know that you're using it through the Cine-Files, which we would appreciate.
Absolutely. And congratulations, John. 30 pounds is an incredible accomplishment.
Thank you, sir. We'll see. We'll see what happens next.
So,
because maintenance is just as important as losing it. Yeah,
that's 100% true. So the film we're tackling today is, of course, Crimson Tide.
Yeah.
We decided to do it to honor the incredible Gene Hackman. It has not been easy to figure out which amazing Gene Hackman performance we wanted to focus on. But frankly, I might have put my thumb on the scale a little bit on this one because, and I'm just going to say this right at the beginning, which is that I'm not saying that Crimson Tide should be spoken of up with Citizen Kane and The Godfather and things like that. I'm not saying that.
Oh, thank God.
This is my kind of movie.
Yeah,
This is my kind of movie. I
this is
fucking
your
love
Armageddon.
this movie.
This is your Armageddon. I'm going to put that on the table.
This movie is so much better
now.
than Armageddon.
What'd you say?
I said this movie is better than Armageddon.
Oh, you're insane.
Objectively.
It's the same quality. Okay.
But yes, this is a movie. This is my thing.
Yeah.
And I watched it when Gene Hackman passed away. I sat down and watched it. I was texting you the whole time about how much I love this movie. And the thing is, this movie is a movie about, it doesn't have a bad guy, a traditional bad guy. That's a thing I've never liked. I always like characters that are doing things for reasons, that have motivations, that believe that they're right. This movie is incredibly well structured and well crafted. It's brilliantly acted. And I'll say one other thing about it. I know I don't usually do this at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah.
You have frequently asked me the question, probably 25, 30 times.
Okay.
What do you think of the editing? And I have always kind of skirted the question.
Hemmed and hawed at times. Yeah.
Because I always am like, well, I don't know what material they had. And so I can't really judge it. And I think that was a pretty wimpy answer much of the time. And because I'll tell you something about this movie.
Yeah.
Is I can tell, watching this film, and I've watched this a lot, and I've also taught some scenes in this film in class. So I really dug deep on some parts of it. The vast majority of this movie, I can tell you every single shot why it's in the movie. Every look, every eye flick, I can tell you why it's in the movie. Wow. The editing it's just so crystal clear in the way it's put together. Yeah. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up. I know don't usually do this at the beginning of our episodes. There's very little info about the making of this film. I found it very hard to find, but what I did find, which was fascinating, was a Reddit thread from submariners, people who actually served in submarines, about this film. And they had a lot of criticisms.
No.
And so that was really interesting to see what they were really against and what they thought should have happened and how things may or may not have worked. So that was really, really, and we'll get to some of those as we go along.
I think this is a film that distinguishes if you've ever served in any form of military capacity and if you haven't. Because there's a lot in the film that I think adheres to things you've seen in the military, I personally have experienced in the military. There's quite a few scenes, because I guess I haven't seen this film in a very, very long time, because I didn't remember a lot of these scenes. And rewatching it again for the show, I found myself going, yep, experienced that. Yep, I know exactly what that is. Yep, that's definitely a military thing. And so in my mind, I was like, this is very military based in terms of its approach. But the minutia of what these guys would do in these situations, I think that Submariner's Reddit thread is probably a place to go to understand how much of this was Hollywoodized and how much of this is a reality of how it would go down if these numerous situations were to occur in this sequential order in this overall scenario.
I think that's very, very interesting. I'm very curious the things that you feel you experienced or really rang true to you.
Yeah.
As you go along.
Black man. I was a black man. No, I'm joking. We'll see. Just to tease that we're going to be talking about those issues in the film as well.
John, do you remember how you first came to the film Crimson Tide?
I know. I was a big Tony Scott fan because of you're a big Tony Scott fan because of Top Gun.
Oh, Top Gun, sure.
So for me, if Tony Scott is doing a movie, I go to see a Tony Scott movie, and I had an unhealthy obsession with True Romance. So those are my formative early years in the 90s. Like Tony Scott was a big deal to me. So when you tell me Tony Scott, Denzel Washington, who was arguably just coming into his prime really as a lead actor, and Gene Hackman, an actor I've loved and respected for years since I was a kid, coming together for a submarine movie. And then you've got these issues going on with military versus, officer versus non-commissioned officer, and also a white older captain and a young black officer coming into the situation, plus nuclear war possibilities. Like a lot of it spoke my language to get me excited to see the movie. So I remember going out to see it on opening weekend. Probably went to see it with whoever was friends with me at the time, because I hated going to see movies by myself. But 1995 is kind of an excellent film for a year for movies. This is one of those ones that kind of really stood out to me and enjoyed thoroughly. And I remember going back to see it a couple more times before it left the theaters. But curiously, I've never owned the film and have never been one for putting it on to rewatch. But whenever I've caught it on TV, I've always enjoyed watching it because it's a stressful film. It's one of the reasons I don't run back to watch it. But I do remember just having a great time in the theater with this movie. And I got to feel this. I mean, I have my opinions on this, but like Michael Bay, I think, studied Tony Scott's career and essentially was like, I'm going to be a better Tony Scott, or try to be a better Tony Scott, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I don't think he's a better Tony Scott. It's funny. I'm not a huge fan of Top Gun, as you know, which I know is one of your favorite movies. Mm-hmm. I think Tony Scott is one of the great underrated directors.
Well, it's hard when your brother is Ridley Scott. It is tough to be in the shadow of Ridley Scott. Plus, he has more of a popcorn entertainment instinct than Ridley. So
it's so funny because I think in general, Ridley Scott is either going to hit it out of the park or strike out.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. And Tony Scott's going to hit a lot of doubles and triples.
Tony Scott gets on base.
Yeah, he's going to get on base.
Right. Ridley is the home run hitter, but Tony's going to get on base by hook or crook. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he's it's the things that I talk about all the time. Tony Scott is a craftsman. Ridley Scott is an artist, and that's sort of the difference. And I think, I should answer my own question, which is because everything you said is the same thing, is that Tony Scott and Bruckheimer movies are ones that are really important, coming up at that time. I'm a huge Gene Hackman fan, a huge Denzel Washington fan, a huge Submarine movie fan.
Yeah,
we're only a few years after Hunt for Red October. So if I didn't see it opening night, I saw it opening weekend. I saw it in the Chinese theater with a bunch of people and just loved it top to bottom. And then I worked on the DVD. So I, watched it. And this was one of those, sometimes on the DVD job, it's like, okay, you have to watch 102 Dalmatians in Croatian. That was not a fun day. When it was, okay, you have to watch Crimson Tide again. I'm like, done.
What language is it this week? I'm in.
Fantastic. Let's go. So here's, again, like I said, I do not have a whole bunch of information about the making of this film, but I'll give you what little I have, which is it sounds like it started with a documentary, a 4-part documentary called Submarines, Sharks of the Sea.
Ooh.
That Bruckheimer and Simpson saw. They sent it to Tony Scott, who obviously they had a long relationship with. And they say, yeah, we should do something with this. And they hire Michael Schiffer, as well as a naval historian and novelist named Richard P. Hedrick. And they started working on it. And of course, Simpson and Bruckheimer have fantastic relationships with the U.S. military.
Oh, yeah.
And Top Gun was a huge success for naval aviators and for pilots in general. And so they call up the U.S. Navy and say, hey, we want to do a submarine movie. And the Navy says, fantastic. That sounds great. And they invite the writers, Tony Scott, Bruckheimer, and Simpson, all onto the USS, I think it's the USS Florida, for some exercises, multiple days underwater, going through all the drills. Wow. And seeing like how does the missile system work? How do the, and without going into confidential information and things like that, they got a good sense of it. And the Navy says, so what is this movie? And they tell them, oh, it's a cross between Hunt for Red October and 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Ooh. Because
what they told them at the time was it was the computer system that we were battling against that was trying to launch the missiles.
Speaking of that, Mission Impossible 8 is out in theaters this weekend, and it's Tom Cruise versus a computer system. So very interesting. Okay.
That is very interesting, which I still have not gone to see. I'll probably see it tomorrow or the next day if I have time.
On.
Now, what I couldn't find out is, was that the actual plan of what they were going to make a movie of? Ooh. Or did they just lie to the Navy because they didn't want to tell the Navy what the movie was really going to be about? I don't know the answer to that question. But what I do know is part of what the Navy did, therefore, on the tour of the boat was to demonstrate why it would be completely impossible for a computer to launch the missiles without humans. And there's no way that could happen. And your movie doesn't make any sense. But we really want you to make a movie about the Navy because Top Gun, such great recruiting stuff for the U.S. military. And they go back and they start working on the script. And then they finally do, in order to have permission to film on actual U.S. naval vessels, they finally do give them the actual script, which is not about fighting a computer. It's about a mutiny and fighting each other. And the Navy looks at the script and says, absolutely not.
No way.
We are not supporting you at all. So suddenly they are scrambling to figure out how the hell they're going to make this movie, which obviously they figure out how to do.
It's different when you have the bald, angry guy at the Top Gun school telling him he's going to fly dog shit out of wherever versus you actually having a battle on a naval ship with nuclear weapons involved. Yeah, sure.
And that really is all the pre-production I have, John. That's everything. Wow. Would you like to get into Crimson Tide?
Let's do it.
Got to talk about Hans Zimmer.
Yeah.
Right with that music, this score, this soundtrack.
Yeah.
This is where I first really understood who Hans Zimmer was. I mean, he'd obviously done things before this, but and it's mostly a synth score, which means this isn't real instruments. And that was radical for this kind of a movie, because you want a big sound for an epic adventure like this. So the way to get a big sound is a big orchestra. Generally, synth stuff sounded small, but not when Hans Zimmer does it. And I will tell you this right now, I've used this music to temp track more than almost anything else. This, along with Peter Gabriel's Passion from Last Temptation of Christ, and the soundtrack for The Mission, and the soundtrack from Akira. These four soundtracks were my go-to. And most of the first Shark documentary and Close Quarters, the reality show Hoover and I tried to do, was all scored with Crimson Tide.
Yeah.
To sell it.
Well, I want to say to you, like, do you really think synthesizers aren't real instruments? Is that where you're drawing a line here? Like, I don't understand your comment when you said that. Can you clarify that a little bit?
Well, I'm not sure exactly where you want to take this conversation. Are synthesizers real instruments?
I think they are.
They're real instruments, but they are not physical instruments that are played in the way that you play a violin.
Aren't you playing the keys on a synthesizer to get the, like Eddie Van Halen was playing a synthesizer for the Jump album for Van Halen, and that was all him on the stage doing it, like playing the keys.
Well,
right?
We could have a whole other. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but so what I was saying,
this might be a new short.
It could be a new short. Because I once witnessed a person who will remain nameless. It was my father-in-law furiously arguing with someone over the difference between an electric guitar, an acoustic guitar, and an electric acoustic guitar. Don't need to go into the details. But what I will say is that part of the difference is that traditional instruments actually make sound, whereas synthesizers make zeros and ones that play through a speaker. And the other, we could go into like how synthesizers work and all the tremendous amount of detail. There are tremendous musicians playing synthesizers.
Yes.
But what is happening when you're doing a synth score like this is you have your keyboard and you play a drum line on your keyboard. And then you play the violin score or any sound that you record somewhere else, you can input and then turn into music through synth, because what synthesize means to fake something. So it is faking violins, it's faking brass, it's faking woodwinds, it's doing all that through a computer. That's what a synthesizer is doing. So it is different. And part of why it's different too, sorry, now you got me talking on this, but is that when you have when John Williams goes in with the LA or with the London Philharmonic, he has 80 musicians playing together live. The synth score was Hans Zimmer played once with one instrument, laid that down, played another one, laid that down over and over again. No real musicians came in to play the synthesizers. It's all the composer.
Yeah, but he's a musician. So
of course he is. It's real music. I'm not disrespecting.
You just said it wasn't real music. That's why
I did not say it wasn't real music. I said there were no real instruments.
Yeah, well, I disagree with that completely.
Oh, there's a computer and a speaker.
That'll be a separate conversation.
All right. So
this is a hell of a run, though, right? Because in the 90s here with Hans is when he's really making his bones. You have Thelma and Louise. You have League of Their Own. You have Point of No Return, which I think is a damn good remake of La Femme Nikita. True Romance, which is a score that I really loved and had on CD. Then you got yourself Crimson Tide. And as we're ending the 90s, you get The Rock, and then jumping into As Good as It Gets, The Prince of Egypt, which I think is an incredible score. And then we get to 2000 with Gladiator. So, and that's when he goes like next level, right? But you're watching an athlete coming into his prime, or arguably a composer coming into his prime, just like an athlete through the 90s, which is phenomenal with the different types of scores and memorable scores that he creates in this.
And what pops up on the screen is we see text that says the three most powerful men in the world: President of the United States, the President of the Russian Republic, and the captain of a U.S. nuclear missile submarine. It's really kind of a startling thought, because I don't think I'd thought of it in quite that way. But then when you see what this movie is, you kind of go, well, it's not wrong, you know? And we see a high angle of this aircraft carrier, and there is a news broadcast going on, and we hear...
This is Richard Valeriani reporting live for CNN from the French aircraft carrier Foch, somewhere in the Mediterranean.
John, why are we on a French aircraft carrier?
I don't know, but I know this guy is a real guy. So they got him to legitimately report what is happening there as the issues are going on between a Russian rebel and the United States.
Well, and the reason that we're on a French aircraft carrier is because the U.S. Navy wanted nothing to do with this movie.
That's why. Okay.
So they called up France and said, hey, guys, you have aircraft carriers. So that's why we did it this way.
You're making fun of the Americans? Yes, you can use our French carrier, please.
And this is, I could so see how they ended up doing it this way, which is that they thought about creative show don't tell ways to explore this rebellion that happened in Russia and this separatist group and what they got. And it was going to cost an extra $10 million and take 10 minutes of screen time. And they're like, you know what? Let's just have a reporter explain everything that's going on at the beginning. It's going to be much easier.
Yeah.
And that's what they do. And that's what we hear is there's this ultra-nationalist leader named Vladimir Rochenko who is taken over part of Russia. They've gotten a big portion of the military. And basically they've also seized somewhere that has Russian nuclear missiles aimed at the United States. And they may or may not be getting control of those missiles.
Yeah. And the guy playing the Russian leader, I guess you would say, of that particular faction is Daniel von Bargen, who some of you may remember as Mr. Kruger on Seinfeld, George's boss. He was Edward Spangler on Malcolm in the Middle and Chief Grady in Super Troopers. He was in a bunch of films like Silence of the Lambs, Broken Arrow, Truman, The Majestic, Philadelphia. Oh, Brother, Where Art Thou? He's the guy that pursues Clooney, Torturo, and he's the guy that pursues them all and almost gets them in the end. And was a part of a number of stage productions as well. Has a long career on stage since the 1980s. And then sadly tried to take his own life in 2012, shot himself in the head because he had diabetes and they were going to amputate his toes and he didn't want to go forward with his life. But he did call 911. They saved him, but he passed away 3 years later from an undisclosed long illness. So an actor who I think a lot of us remember in so many things that we've enjoyed both on film and television, but sadly, clearly a lot of his real physical ailments got to him and he chose certain paths, so it's a shame, but I love him here. He's just as good as Homie in Rocky IV playing this kind of outlandish Russian leader who wants to threaten the United States,
Well, and one of the things that we see is we're seeing all of the, newsreel footage and real news footage is that we see footage from the 1991 coup attempt in Moscow.
Yes.
Which is, and so this is right at, the Soviet Union has just fallen. That coup attempt was really, really scary. And of course, that moment is kind of the beginning of Vladimir Putin's rise to power.
Right.
And so watching it today, I'm also going, okay, Russian group who's suddenly kind of threatening or nuclear war, that's happening right now.
Yeah, I know. It is kind of scary how much this film from 30 years ago, and this is the 30th anniversary of the film, Steve, this year, how much what's going on, not only the overall premise of what sides are fighting and what's being said between them in terms of the rhetoric, but what goes on in the boat, in the submarine. There is a lot of things that still resonate nowadays with dialogue and the rhetoric we're having in our society.
So this news report really shows us that we're hurtling towards a really, really scary, fraught situation. And so naturally, since the tension is so high, where do we cut from this world-shaking, shattering events, but to a kid's birthday party?
I can't hear you.
And we can see Denzel Washington there and being cute dad and filming his kid, and his kid is having their birthday with a magician, and it's all very fun.
Yeah.
And then he realizes that the battery for his video camera is dying, so he goes over to get a new battery, and what's playing on the TV where he goes to get a new battery is more reports about this potential war, and we hear
Russian ultra-nationalist leader, backed by his rebel army, threatened nuclear attack on the United States and Japan.
And then there's this other person there who at the time I had no idea who this was. Yeah. But of course, now the second you cut to him, you see Viggo Mortensen, you cannot not recognize Strider Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings is right here.
It's funny how people go back and watch these 90s films and how he pops up in the most unusual places, like Carlito's Way and other films like this throughout the 90s. G.I. Jane, he's great in G.I. Jane. And so all of this was the buildup. Again, just like Hans Zimmer was building up, you see that clearly Viggo was building up to being in Lord of the Rings and playing an incredible role there in Aragorn throughout those three movies.
And this is what I mean, by the way, about the editing being so crystal clear. Is like there's a moment in this scene where mom is still part of the birthday party, but she's noticed that her husband is gone and kind of looks over because she knows what's going on in the world.
Right.
And it's just it's a little cut and a little flick of the eyes, but it's enough to tell you what's happening.
But half an hour ago, surrounded by hostile forces, rebel leader Vladimir Radchenko threatened...
Maybe it's not as bad as it looks.
And right as he says that, the phone rings.
Yeah.
And Denzel goes to answer the phone, and in the next moment, Viggo's pager goes off. And he says,
It is.
And so this is a great character beat. Steve, of course, you're a writer, you know these things. And in movies, like, you got to establish a little bit about your characters without doing it as an exposition dump, right? So right from this opening scene, we know that he is a family man. He loves his daughters. The fact that he volunteers to be the volunteer for the magician is very cute. We also know that he's not a super attentive dad because he doesn't have the battery plugged in, like he doesn't have the camera ready to go, and so the battery's going to run out, so he might have missed the moment and recording the moment because his focus is his dedication to his job as a military man. It's not a negative. It's just the way he's built, right? He will skip his daughter's moment because a phone call comes in and he's got to address this thing. So you're giving little character beats without hanging a lantern on them for you as the audience to kind of subconsciously understand this guy's motivation. And the film does a good job of kind of keeping the wife and his children like as a kind of smaller part of the film overall, just to give him a little bit of that he's a family man, but there is this element that he is much more committed to the military. And his wife's look, I think gives that all away, as you mentioned, Steve, even more so, right? She's worried about it, but she also knows he's going to go because he's not going to say no. You know?
I think it's
and his relationship with Vigo, which is clearly going to play a big part as the movie goes along. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point of just because you immediately go with no dialogue or essentially no dialogue. Oh, these guys are really good friends who've known each other a long time.
100%. Yes.
It also, I think it just humanizes him. This is the home front.
Yep.
Like this is a military person who has dedicated their life to serving their country and knows, and now it's this moment where everybody in the world knows, and she knows what he does for a living. Like it makes it very real.
He's our protagonist. We want to like him. So what do?
Yeah.
You put him at a kid's birthday party, his kid's birthday party. You make him a dad, but you also make him a military guy who understands the importance of his service. So you're like checking off all these boxes before you even get going in the movie.
We cut to he's in a car. It's rainy. He goes through a checkpoint. And then we have this shot of a Jack Russell Terrier looking very cute, sitting below the desk. And we start hearing Gene Hackman's voice before we actually see him.
Annapolis. 5 patrols on fast attacks, 2 on boomers.
I mean, what do you want to say? The late, great Gene Hackman. And I love this as an introduction as well, sitting up top, playing with the dog. Like there's little elements of that. And I certainly served under people like this in the Army who radiate this kind of energy. And have a dog or a pet that they have with them all the time that they walk with or walk to the podium to speak with. Like I've seen this in the military.
So the first person who was up for this part and was in serious negotiations was Warren Beatty.
Oh, wow. Why do they think of Beatty for these films that he completely does not fit in, Steve, in my opinion?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I don't understand this. Look, I like Warren Beatty in certain Warren Beatty films.
We like Beatty. Yeah.
I don't think he has the widest range of any actor at all.
He does. He thinks he does, but I don't think he does.
There are so many. The only person who's came up maybe as much as Warren Beatty is like almost was Sterling Hayden. All the time we would hear. Like I know that he was supposed to play Quint in Jaws, and there's just so many roles where you heard, it's going to be Sterling Hayden. Warren Beatty's come up all the time. I don't see that at all. I do see the next actor who actually, I think, maybe signed up or was going to do it. It was very, very close.
Okay.
And that is Al Pacino.
Oh, wow.
That would have been something.
Oh, my God. Al Pacino, Denzel Washington. There wouldn't have been any screen left for anybody else.
I know, right?
Holy God. That would be amazing.
Well, and
like dogs? Yeah, that's what.
The Lipinsanas.
They offered Val Kilmer a role too, speaking of people who offered. And
I didn't see that.
I think he was probably offered the Viggo Mortensen role, but he turned it down. It would make sense. Him and Denzel, of course, they later reunited under Tony Scott in Deja Vu. So I think he probably had an idea to put these two guys together early in their careers when they were getting hot. So
it would surprise me because he's a big star. I mean, like this is mid-90s, so it's surprised that he would be the Viggo role. He wasn't up for the Denzel role?
No, I think they were looking at him to play the kind of I think they were probably going to beef up that role a little bit more with the back and forth between the two of them. Because he does end up being the guy that kind of betrays him down the road, right? So I imagine you want to have someone whose betrayal really resonates with the audience. Nothing against Viggo, he wasn't that well known, but you put Val Kilmer in that role, and his betrayal becomes an even bigger part of the movie when that starts to happen in the last 45 minutes of the film.
What's interesting, though, is that, of course, it wasn't going to be Denzel Washington either, because there was another actor who had heard about this project, who actively lobbied for the part. Ooh. And then when he heard that there was going to be Al Pacino, then he really seriously lobbied for the part. He got the part, I believe. I don't know if contracts were signed, but that actor is Brad Pitt.
Wow.
So Brad Pitt and Al Pacino in Crimson Tide.
I mean, I'd love to see the sketch of it, like someone, but I don't know that would necessarily work because neither one of those two guys resonates military man to me in any way, shape, or form. So,
I mean, I love this movie, so I'm obviously biased. Brad Pitt is a really good actor. Al Pacino, one of the great actors of all time. Brad Pitt has been amazing in many, many movies. I don't think he could do what Denzel's stillness in particular in this film, power and strength of character
Yeah.
I don't think I've never seen Brad Pitt do anything like that, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And Denzel's older at this point. And so it works better with him and Hackman.
But what happens is that for some reason, and I don't know what it is, Al Pacino had to drop out. And when Al Pacino dropped out, Brad Pitt went, never mind. And he dropped out.
Because Brad Pitt had worked with Tony Scott in True Romance.
Right.
So, yeah.
And the other actor we see who's standing behind the desk, who I think is like a pillar of strength in this movie, and that's George Zunda playing Cobb, chief of the boat.
Yeah, George Zunda, who you've seen in Basic Instinct, The Deer Hunter, the first season of Law and Order. This is a guy who had a very healthy confidence in himself as an actor because he walked away from Law and Order because he felt like it wasn't challenging enough for him as an actor, and that's why he walked. Hey, look, Dennis Farina said that. So did Paul Sorvino. If people forget, like Law and Order has had an interesting resume or a roster of detectives in their camp. But Zunza has moved between both TV and film really well, and I've enjoyed him, and I like him, as you said, Steve. He's a great part of this film and an experienced actor both on stage and screen. Who brings the right amount of walking that line, that type. He's kind of the unsung hero of the film, Steve, because nothing happens without him siding with Denzel initially. Nothing could happen unless he sides. So you got to present him as a guy who seems to be a person who is on the captain's side until he makes that turn.
And now we have Denzel, who's, by the way, Lieutenant Commander Hunter. I don't know if I've actually said his name before. He's sitting there in his dress blues while Captain Ramsay, which is Gene Hackman, is going over his resume. And the moment that's interesting is he's listing all of his assignments as he gets to
A year at, Harvard.
And this is critical.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning.
Right. We're first of all, Harvard in the news right now. As I said, this is a film that's resonating so much with us now. But immediately you get the sensation you get a hint of the conflict that is going to come. There is the military grizzled old man, and they even put hang a lantern on it later on in the film, Steve, when they make a conversation about Patton, except they're comparing the Russian military leader to Patton, but it's really Hackman who is Patton-esque in this movie. And you have the young, educated black man here versus the grizzled white captain. And so you see this element. Now, you can strip away the race, that's fine, but you're seeing old military versus new military. Someone who's experienced theaters of war, someone who hasn't. And so you're seeing the beginnings of this conflict and the way they're going. And listen, people need to pay attention to movies. And in this movie, it's very clear that there's a little mini running commentary throughout the movie that there is a desire for Gene Hackman to look down upon Denzel throughout the film, their characters, because of where he's from, where he's coming from, possibly the color of his skin, certainly his education. So there's a lot of things that are mixed into this, but certainly the old military versus new military is the most predominant surface level conflict that's being teased here in this opening scene. And I've seen this so many times in the military.
I think one of the many things that this movie is, and this is part of what draws me to it, is that it's really a dialogue on leadership. Mm-hmm. It's because the leadership style of these two guys, and it's funny. And again, reading that Submariner thread on Reddit, and then reading there are a lot of different takes and opinions about, in particular, about Captain Ramsay's leadership style.
Yeah,
and there are things that we might find fault with and discuss. But to me, the way I have always taken it, this is just my bias. I think these are both great leaders in their way, and there are flaws, and there are problems. But Gene Hackman comes from the hard ass, tough brass working man, came up through the military, follow orders kind of school. Yeah. And that is not the school that Lieutenant Commander Hunter comes from.
No, because he's coming from school. Like in essence, he's never seen a theater of war, right? Which is another element to throw into another piece of wood to throw into this fire between these guys, is that one thinks that he knows everything because he's seen so many theaters of war, and one hasn't and has that used against him when it's convenient.
I talked to your former CO. He tells me he tried to adopt you.
Which again is a great little thing to drop about what we're setting up about this character.
Yeah.
We hear that the previous XO had appendicitis and they need a last minute replacement.
I need a good man to fill his spot. Your name was at the top of the list.
Well, that's good to know, sir.
It was a short list.
It might have just been him on that list.
Yeah. Yeah, because as we find out later from Gandolfini, quite a few of these CEOs, he's gone through quite a few of these CEOs. So, as when you put it in context after that line, it's very clear that Ramsay likes to ride his CEOs into the ground because he feels inadequate next to them. And I think that's an element I've seen as well. I don't think it has to be even military based. You just see people all the time who look at young people who are more educated or more able, and they want to drive them into the ground because they fear they're coming for their jobs and they don't want to lose power.
It's certainly something you see in the film industry. There are plenty of executives. It's so funny, by the way. We should do another shirt on at some point. Have you watched The Studio?
Oh, yeah. We blazed through that in 2 days when we got the screeners. Yeah.
That is like a fucking documentary.
Uh-huh.
And there's it's ridiculous, but it's real. And there's a lot of people in the film industry who won't hire people more qualified than them.
Yes.
Because they're feel threatened by it.
Yes. I got texts all through the season of that from certain people who work in studios telling me how accurate that is. Yeah.
Your interest, Mr. Hunter, what do you like to do? Do you paint, play ball, play an instrument, ride motorcycles? What?
Ride horses.
And again, this goes to this point of class structure, which of course is interesting being that we have a white man and a black man, but it's the person who is the more educated person is the African-American person.
What's the best horse you ever rode?
Arabian, sir.
An Arabian. Oh, that's a powerful animal.
Yes. You ever ridden one?
Me? Are you kidding? No, I couldn't handle Arabian. Just give me an old paint.
Yeah, again, dialogue here is super important. And look, some of you may want to see this, some of you don't. It's up to you. But dialogue is super important. Dialogue makes a commentary, especially with a film like this. I think, Steve speaks very highly of the film. It's because it resonates with him because there's a lot of intellectual stuff going on here between these guys and also some cool action sequences as well. Yeah. But certainly this is the beginning of, as we said, the scene is the beginning of each of them, not really Denzel feeling him out, more Gene Hackman feeling him out, where the lines are, where are the buttons to push on this guy. And there are quite a few people who are in the upper level of the military who, well, I guess I should stop comparing the military, just say in anything, who want to find out where the buttons are to push on certain people so that if the shit hits the fan, they can somehow undercut them. And so him saying this stuff about Harvard, 1 year at Harvard, he makes a big deal out of it to kind of slightly scoff at it. These are little microaggressions that he's doing towards Denzel, not necessarily because he's black, but certainly because he's young, educated. And look, Denzel, you can't deny this, because if you want to bring race into it, this is a young black man who's getting an opportunity to serve under one of the well-known, famous captains of a nuclear submarine. This is going to be great for his career, but he knows sometimes you have to smile and go along to get along in a situation like this. So throughout the movie, up until he makes the turn, there are little moments where Gene Hackman is stepping on him, ridiculing him, undercutting him, putting him in embarrassing moments. And this is yet another one. This is like one of these first ones that's going to foreshadow the number of times he's going to do it throughout the movie.
I think those are great points. And there is one, it's funny because there's one particular moment where he purposely embarrasses him.
Yes.
It is the one. There are a lot of moments in this where I'm kind of, okay, I would obviously not do it this way, but I understand what he's like why this is working for him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I, as a leader, am a huggy, touchy, feely, friendly, supportive leader.
Right.
Like I'm not, I doubt you've ever seen me be a hard ass. I'm not a hard ass. Like that's not how I think of things. But I've worked with hard asses, and I understand that that's sometimes what people need. The hard asses can be great leaders. And in fact, one of my weaknesses is that I don't have that gear, really very easily. It was very hard for me when I was teaching. When I was suddenly like, oh, this person is really fucking up. They actually need a kick in the ass. That's what they need at this moment.
That's why you need to just hit the emergency button and I pop out of the room.
I totally should.
Like I'm your, was it Keegan-Michael Key? I'm your anger interpreter.
Absolutely. Well, when I did the assistants, literally Michael Dennis, who's my producer, that's what he did. He came to me and he was like, and I was like, we have a problem with this and I don't like, and he was like, you bring it to me. If you have a problem, then which is actually generally what happens on movie sets,
right?
Because you don't want a lot of anger going directly towards the director,
right? No,
you want to protect the director from that. Yeah.
Right.
So I totally will call you. I'm calling you to negotiate my next car deal. I know I'm doing that.
Oh yeah, 100%. I love it.
And now I'm good. If I'm ever really, irritated, it's like, I'm really pissed at, can I do it with my son? Can you come and yell at him?
I'm not getting involved in that. Families, no, because people's allegiances switch on a dime. So I'm not getting involved in that. But other stuff, contract negotiations, whatever, I love doing that shit.
Great.
I should be
Sounds
making
good.
6 figures negotiating for people.
Fuck yes, you
it
should.
could be a lot of fun doing that.
But the other thing
is, one other thing here, Steve.
Yeah.
He mentions the old whatever, the old night. That's him trying to convey that, hey, I'm just old salt and bones. Like, I'm a regular salt of the earth guy. It's his way of undercutting Denzel. Oh, an Arabian. Oh, look at you, right? It's his way of trying to undercut the strength that this guy could have coming into a situation. So these are these little microaggressions. I just wanted to stress that because I felt I forgot it earlier.
It's also what's interesting is that it's undercutting through showing weakness.
Yes.
Because what he said is, I could never ride the horse that you're riding, that you ride. I am not at your level. That's what he's saying. And then he cuts himself down through the whole kind of speech.
Right.
And get to the point of an old paint. But he's also, it totally can be interpreted as microaggressions. I'm not saying that it's not. It's also modeling, in modeling being the leadership term of like, I'm going to show you what kind of soldier I want you to be by talking about how I am. This is how I see the world.
Right.
And that he's going simple, practical, non-intellectual. That's what he's saying.
But I also think that's an act. And
I totally think it's an act.
This happens all the time where people present themselves as lesser than they actually are just so they can get a dig in at you. And you see it all the time now in the world of influencers. All the time, people go like, what is my life? How is this happening to me? Yet they're the ones who've been bitching behind the scenes to get these opportunities and calling people left and right so they can be in a position to do certain things. But then to the public, they're always like, this is amazing. How is this all happening to me? Right. It's all fake stuff that you see in any power or dynamic between people.
It's funny we brought up the studio, but Zoe Kravitz's character in the studio is exactly this. Yeah. And the thing is, to be real clear, Captain Ramsay's is an act.
Yes. This idea that he doesn't know about Arabians or would never handle Arabian, bullshit. He would jump on Arabian in a minute.
I mean, he has created it, and it's not just like lots of good actors. It's not that the act isn't based on truth.
Right.
There is a lot of truth there, like he is who he's claiming to be, but he is also creating a performance of Captain Ramsay. Yeah. And he says, this line, you're going to take this as this is a job interview. And he says this line.
Yeah, horses, they're fascinating animals. Dumb as fence posts, but very intuitive. In that way, they're not too different from high school girls. They might not have a brain in their head, but they do know all the boys want to fuck them.
Yeah, it's such a weird line. Why is this old man talking about high school girls? It's weird.
I think this kind of joke makes him very popular with a certain group of seamen and young officers.
Oh, probably true. Yeah, probably true. Not the most intelligent ones either. But the thing is, you have to start, and Steve, this is something to consider as we go along through the movie. Because Tarantino did a pass on this script, very famously so. Him and Denzel apparently got into it on a couple of things. So it would be curious to pick out, because this feels like a Tarantino back and forth. Because I don't know why Gene Hackman would ever say something like that. But your logic makes sense, because he writes that in because Tarantino goes, well, this is a guy who appeals to a certain section or certain kind of crewman, and these kinds of back and forths will play to it. And he might also be poking at Denzel to see what his reaction is going to be when he makes
he totally is. He totally is. Well, the other thing that's going on in the scene is we have Cobb, chief of the boat, who's standing between them, listening to them. And so we're seeing his reactions. And he loves Captain Ramsay.
Yeah,
loves him. Yeah. And he's enjoying that. He's heard Captain Ramsay say these things, to new people all the time. He understands what he's doing. And of course, the next moment we have is the little dog kind of barks at Hunter. Hunter pets him. The dog likes Hunter. And Ramsay says,
he approves of you. Jack Russell's smartest dog's alive. Name's Bear. Goes every place with me.
And then he says,
well, welcome aboard the Alabama, son. Do me proud.
I will, sir.
And I think, too, Hunter has heard of Captain Ramsay. He knows who this guy is. Yeah. And I think at this moment, it's an honor to serve under this person. I think that's how Denzel's character is feeling.
Yeah, agreed.
We have a brief TV interview where we hear,
if one Russian citizen is killed, and I am president, then I will kill 900,000 of the people who are responsible.
That is some fucking scary shit.
Yep. And it's good to have this at this moment, right? Because it lets us know, like, okay, there's some real serious shit going on. So when stuff starts to get real tight later on in the film, we are aware of the threat. We're very aware of the threat.
And then we have our big briefing where we have the officers and some crew members and Captain Ramsay and an admiral. And basically, I won't go into every line, but what we're talking about is this standoff that's coming and this crazy guy who has access to nuclear weapons.
In the good old days of the Cold War, the Russians could always be depended on doing whatever's in their own best interests. But this Rodchenko's playing a whole new ball game. Now, I've heard people talk, but I don't think this man's talking just to get his picture in the paper. He seems to have a serious weed up his ass and a legitimate gripe.
So what the situation is basically they've got the access to ICBMs.
Yep.
The Russian government, the real Russian government is saying they don't have the codes to launch anything.
Right.
But if they got the codes, they could launch on Japan and the United States in a matter of minutes.
Yep.
Right now they're at DEFCON 4. And if the Russians get access to those codes, if Rodchenko gets access to the codes, they're going to have to launch.
Lieutenant Commander Hunter is our new XO. Please bring him up to speed on ship's personnel and supplies.
After he exits, Hunter stays in the room. And then Webbs, Vigo's character, introduces some of the other officers. We're going to go in more detail on who these actors are, but the ones that are important, we meet Doherty, which is James Gandolfini. We meet Billy Linkletter, which is Michael Milione.
And you know Derek.
Yes, Westergaard. Long time no see.
Yeah, how's Julia?
She's excellent.
Good.
So this is another officer, African-American officer, played by
Yes.
Rocky Carroll, that he served with in the past. And they obviously know each other pretty well.
Yeah.
And finally, you meet Roy Zimmer, who is communications. That's played by Matt Craven. And again, John's got some bios for some of these folks, but we'll get to them when we can actually hear their voices a little bit more.
I think his dog gave me the final seal of approval.
He's crazy about that dog. Takes him everywhere. The Navy looks the other way because he's Ramsay.
The Navy looks the other way because he's one of the few skippers left who've actually seen some combat.
And this is where we hear how special this guy is.
Yes. So again, like the introduction with Denzel was more kind of like scenario based to give you an idea of who this guy is, right? This is the introduction with they introduced the conflict between Denzel and Gene in that scene, but now we've got a little more background on who this guy is, hearing the people who serve under him and the legendary status this guy has and the places that he served. So now we're clear. This is a young up-and-coming military officer who's getting chosen to be a second in command on this sub, and he is very decorated and educated. Now we have the older guy, but now we know as an audience the places and the theaters of war he's been. So we're now understanding a little bit more about the burgeoning conflict that is going to happen and why both of them are in the positions that they're in.
Well, and I think one of the things that this movie does really well is that it's really saying these guys are great so far. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's not saying, like, and this is what I mean, it's like, it's not going, like, we're not in the Kane Mutiny where you're setting up that Captain Bligh is a terrible person and we're going to have a mutiny against them because obviously this is a bad person. We're setting up that there's some sparks between Denzel Washington's character and Gene Hackman's character.
Yeah.
There's some minor tension, but mostly we're saying these guys are great, you know? That's what's, there's no sense of they're serving under an oppressive captain. There's a sense that they're serving under a hard ass who can be a pain and has a strong personality, but they respect him.
I think from the beginning, that's what you're supposed to believe. But as the film goes on, the people who are on his side are also the people who do these kind of abusive, bullying things in the movie. And so...
Well, particularly
Gandolfini's character.
Gandolfini's character, yeah.
So that's how the film is telling you how to view him overall, in my opinion.
Well, what's interesting, and in my mind, Gandolfini's the only bad guy in this movie. Like, everyone else to me is, well, there's the I don't know. Yeah.
I think they all go bad a little bit for their own reasonings. Like Matt Craven trying to rally everybody and convince Vigo that he has to turn on his friend, and then all those things, and Rocky too. Like, I think a little bit Rocky as a fellow black serviceman sitting there not wanting to support him, I think is a little bit unsettling. But there's ways to go bone deep on this stuff, because I'm not saying every black man should support every black man, but it's more a matter of a scenario situation. And like, he doesn't even give him the benefit of the doubt. And when shit goes down and they freak out, what do? They run to the guy who they know has experience serving in the military and leading them leading submarines into theaters of war. And so out of fear, they make these decisions, right? I don't think they're bad people, but I do think they make these decisions out of fear that could be looked at as bad decisions that violate the chain of command.
Well, one of the problems, and we'll table some of this discussion because this is what we're going to talk about. I mean, we're going to get into all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But I think one of the limitations of the English language is that we use bad to say something that is evil,
right?
And we also use bad to say something that is unwise or foolish, like a bad decision,
right?
And the thin line between those things in this movie, is very, very thin because we're going to get into this situation where we don't know if we should launch our nuclear weapons or not,
right?
And one thing I'll say it right here, I would have said it later, but it's kind of come up, is that it is just as possible that Gene Hackman is completely right.
Yes.
As Denzel Washington. And so what is good and bad is like, it gets into a real complicated gray area.
That's what makes the movie so much fun, because you know, having seen it already, you know how it ends up. But the first time you watch it, you're not really sure who is right and who is wrong in this scenario. And I think it asks a question of you as a viewer. Where are you at, and why do you side with one or the other? What are your actual reasons for siding for one or the other? You know, and I think that's a fascinating journey to go on as a viewer in a film like this.
Well, because if we knew ahead of time which the right decision was, it would be easy.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's what's so tough about this. We're on the bus, and there's a little, like, I don't know, it's not exactly movie going on between Gandolfini and Viggo Mortensen's character. And the great thing is they're talking about the classic sub movies like Run Silent and Run Deep. And they're arguing about that. And the sailors are showing up. And then in comes Mark Christopher Lawrence, who plays Specialist Rono, who is a big guy who sits down next to Gandolfini, very friendly.
How you doing?
I'm fine, thanks.
Good. Address me as sir when you speak to me. Stand at attention, sailor.
And I've known many assholes like this on the officer side of things. So yeah, this moment is, and he makes fun of him for being large, as if Gandolfini's a small, or the
because he's so slim.
Gandolfini's a small person, and makes him get down and do 20, right? But again, look at this, and I want to make it really clear. I know some people might get upset about this, but this is a white officer telling a black man to yelling at him, standing up, making him do push-ups, embarrassing him, commenting on his size if he fits in the ship. Again, little microaggressions you're seeing. You know, this is very subtle playing throughout the movie, and he's a bad guy, Gandolfini. And so the fact that he's doing this and he sides with the captain, I think the movie is making a slight commentary on what's going on here. And so I appreciate that for the 1990s, you know, how they approach this kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, you know, I mentioned this Reddit thread. There are all sorts of things they discuss. They discuss, you know, who should have the missile keys, whether or not they would go forward with launching the missile, like putting, you know, Gene Hackman sticking a gun to a seaman's head and threatening to kill him. Like they discuss all that. Not one thing had more anger and people talking about it than this moment. They were like, and I think Gandolfini's character is like supply officer. They're like, a supply officer would never do that.
Yeah.
That is the word. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Everyone would laugh him off the bus if he tried to pull this move. It's crazy. It's just huge reaction against this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's so, but that's the taking a liberty to make sure this character is very clearly a bad person. And so, doing these things, even though they're not usually what you see in the military, from that level of officer, is on purpose. You know,
it's funny. They're not at the same scale, but a lot of the things they were finding fault with sounded perfectly correct that they were finding fault with, and I sort of put it like in the Braveheart boat, which is that Braveheart. I fucking love that movie. Great movie, and totally will acknowledge the ridiculousness of how not historical it is.
Yeah, 100%.
I fucking love this movie and completely acknowledge when we get to certain things that, like, okay, I understand that that's not.
Oh, of course. Look, I mean, there's a lot in Top Gun that isn't damn factual. So, you know, you have the things that you prefer and you like and you excuse, and that's okay because you like the movies, you know?
Yeah. What always bugs me is when people refuse to hear the things that are, it's like, you know, it's like, no, you can love Braveheart.
Yeah.
But but the person that he's supposed to be in love with him was 3 when he died. So that doesn't make sense. Anyway, Hunter is in his car with the family and kids, and it's a really sweet scene. Yeah. And I love that he says he's worried about the dog because he wants his son to, but he wants to reassure his kids, you know?
Yep. Worried about T. Yeah. It's a sweet moment. Again, there's not much dialogue with the family, but they mine it for what they need to mine it for so that you can feel that this guy's a family man and has affection for his family, but he's also dedicated to his job.
Well, and I think the way he handles it with the wife, there's this pause and him saying,
You know, I don't know what to say.
Just say goodbye.
It's really, really sweet. And I think that almost non-dialogue, you feel all of everything that's underneath. She's a smart woman. She knows what's going on in the world. She knows literally the world could end in the next couple of weeks. And he's going off to be a part of that. And it's all in the scene.
Yeah, and his wife still working today, Vanessa Bell Calloway. Fantastic actress. She was in Coming to America, What's Love Got to Do with It? And recently in One of Them Days, which is one of those films that people really enjoy that came out earlier this year, The Black Hamptons, the Vince Staples Show. So she's worked consistently on TV and film for quite some time. And so, you know, sometimes these actresses get a few minutes with Denzel. They don't get a lot. Like my friend who plays his wife in, I think it is is it Inside Man? Yeah, I think plays his wife in Inside Man. She only has a few scenes with him, but she's now a big name, Cassandra Freeman. So, you know, you get these actresses who get seen and make the most of the opportunity, which I think is great to see.
First of all, this is classic Simpson Bruckheimer of like, we could have a little briefing where the captain talks to the crew and we could just have it in a room. I remember there's the thing in Top Gun where they have their classroom and they're in a hangar.
Yeah.
When she shows up and there's like a big, American flag everywhere, of course, all that stuff. And the military advisors were like, we have a briefing room. It's right over here. We could just use that's where we would be in the briefing room. We would never have this in this hangar. And Bruckheimer and Tony Scott are like, in this movie, they have briefings in a big hangar. It's like, so we could have a little talk to the crew in like a nice shelter, but no, we have it in the rain, pouring rain and sparks flying and umbrellas and the dog is there. And it's just all super dramatic and awesome.
And the score is good.
And the score is going. And he says,
Little ducks, there's trouble in Russia. So they called us. And we're going over there and bringing the most lethal killing machine ever devised.
Which really is true. I mean, that's this is a pretty scary thing. I think, let me ask this question this way. Because Ramsay's putting on a performance. This is
of course.
This is a show.
Yeah.
If you are the average young seaman, maybe a bit scared, going on to this, how do you think this is ridiculous and stupid, or do you eat this shit up?
No, I think it all depends on how you were raised, because maybe you had a grandfather or father who was like this and you saw through them early enough. But no, most of the time when you're seeing someone like this come through with this, and especially with this kind of pedigree and that kind of name and the legend status, first of all, you're honored to be serving on a ship with him. So immediately he has a massive benefit of the doubt with you. So when he comes in and he's doing the Ramsay thing, because as you said, he is performing, this is all for the enlisted men to feel a certain way about this and feel that they're in good hands with someone who is strong and a hard ass and understands the severity of the situation. So you can feel comfortable doing your job. Act or not, I think it's important to have that element so that people who are on the lower stratus of the rankings there will be able to do their jobs and feel comfortable that they're all rowing in the same motion. And so, I don't mind stuff like this, although it is, you get older, you see how performative this nonsense really is. But when you're young and you're full of piss and vinegar, this is the kind of stuff you need.
It also goes to, and this is both a Gene Hackman thing and a Captain Ramsay thing, how well do you perform the thing that's performative?
Yeah, right. 100%. Oh, it's super important. And let me turn this around on you. This is 3 years after Unforgiven. Am I wrong to feel a little Bill in here at times? It feels a little Bill at times.
Never, ever popped into my brain. And I mean, part of it, so I had seen Unforgiven a few times, but it's not my movie as much as your movie. And so that little Bill character doesn't haunt me as much, I think. You know, like, so no, it never
haunts me, but I love his character. Yes.
But it never occurred to me. And the thing I would say is, I mean, first of all, Gene Hackman is fucking great. You know, he's just one of the, you know, as we talked about when we did our tribute, this guy can do anything. And the thing, and this is what it's going to be interesting, because I think you're in a slightly different place about Captain Ramsay's than I am.
Oh yeah.
And so like, it's all goes into the subtleties of how much do you read into and what do you read into the little cracks. And there certainly are a lot of cracks and a lot of things, but I never read evil in any of it. It is.
I don't think Little Bill thinks he's evil.
No, but Little Bill doesn't think he's evil, but Little Bill is evil. I don't think I think Captain Ramsay's is doing what he thinks his duty is.
But this feels like a subjective situation, right?
Sure, absolutely. Well, yes, we'll get into it.
Yeah. I mean, he's not whipping people on posts, right?
Yeah,
but
I mean,
like you do.
Little Bill gets off on breaking down people.
But Ramsay gets off on power. Ramsay gets off on making other people feel small around him.
There's, like I said, in particular, one moment that I think is just
right, and that's on purpose, because it's the one moment. It's the person who feels he's most threatened by, that he does the most public of embarrassment on purpose.
Yeah, I am assuming we're speaking about the same moment. We'll find out.
Yeah,
I assume we are. He says, and it's one of the fun things to watch Cobb, because he has seen this kind of speech before.
Yep.
He sees the moves. I think Cobb has been with Ramsay's long enough to see how effective it is with the men.
This might be our Commander-in-Chief's Navy, but this is my boat. And all I ask is that you keep up with me. And if you can't, that strange sensation you'll be feeling in the seat of your pants will be my boot in your ass.
And the crew, they'd laugh and they'd eat it all up.
Yeah, but this dialogue, him discounting the commander-in-chief, it shows that he has a certain, what do you call that, where you have a grandiosity about yourself. That's what he essentially is saying. Why would you insult the president in that way? Yeah, it's your boat. You don't need to undercut the president's power by saying, oh, he may be in control, but it's my boat. And it's like, no, you don't need to say that. But you need to say that in the dialogue to show you that he can be power mad and he has a power complex, in the way I see it.
Again, it's so funny because I see it slightly differently. I mean, it's certainly, that's totally motivatable, what you just said. And to me, it's like, you know, if I got hired, I wouldn't make this exact speech, but if I got hired to do Andor season 3, and I would go, I could see myself saying, now this is a Disney production, but this is my show, you know?
Okay.
Well, exactly.
Steve was fired today.
That's certainly possible. But you know, because like the feeling, it's like when Steve Jobs went over to the Macintosh. He flew a pirate flag over the Mac and said, "We're not part of Apple anymore. We are rebels." And doing like that idea of separating yourself out and saying we're special in this way. You know, so but I see what you're saying of dissing that is the commander-in-chief.
Yes. Yeah. And who is the commander-in-chief right now in 95? It's Clinton, right? In 95.
Yeah, it's mid-Clinton. We're mid-Clinton.
Yeah. A Democrat in power versus a hard-ass old grizzled, probably Republican in charge of the ship. So this undercutting is an interesting thing. Yeah.
But so imagine that imagine this movie is 2025.
Yeah. I wouldn't want it to be said that way either. I don't think you want to undercut when you're in charge of men, because that's a dangerous path you're opening the door to.
But it is also one of the important themes of this movie, which is, are you supposed to be a rubber stamp exactly following orders of the superiorness, or are you supposed to separate yourself out and think on your own?
Yeah. Yeah.
By the way, you might notice that there is a submarine behind them.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the Navy wouldn't have any involvement with them, so they couldn't get a naval submarine. And so they scrambled around trying to find, like, what are we going to do? And this is actually the USS Barbell, which was commissioned in 1959 and it decommissioned in 89. It was sold for scrap metal.
Wow.
And it was being taken over, and they actually took the conning tower and had already destroyed it. And they were about to scrap the rest of the sub when the Crimson Tide production designer found this thing and said, wait, stop, let's take this. And they towed a half-destroyed submarine over to this location, built out of plywood, a new conning tower to put on top of it. And you have the rain and the sparks and all of that stuff. And it looks awesome.
Yeah, it does.
then we have this sequence of, it's like call and repeat in a religious ceremony.
You're aware of the name of this ship, aren't you, Mr. Cobb? Very aware, sir. It bears a proud name, doesn't it, Mr. Cobb? Very proud, sir. It represents fine people. Very fine people, sir.
I love it. I eat all this shit up. I think it's great.
I know you do. Because you never served. And, it's fun. But when you're in it, it's like, okay. Let's see what we're doing.
You're 100% correct, because this is exactly the kind of thing I would roll my eyes at.
Right.
I love it in a movie.
Yeah.
But you're right.
No, it's great in a movie. Yeah, of course, for effect. But like if someone was to go, I love looking at a film set and look at the way that, and you'd be like, you have no fucking idea what it's actually
so boring. Yeah. You don't want to, it's hot and boring.
And it's only a model.
It's only a model. And we build up to the name of the boat.
And what is that name, Mr. Cobb? Alabama, sir. And what do we say? Go, Bama! Roll Tide!
Any comments on Roll Tide and Bama?
I mean, what can you say? I mean, again, listen, Alabama, what happened in Alabama? So, you have these little things, these little subtle moments, these little subtle things, to hint at things that are coming. And so a Roll Tide, that's the thing you say when you're from University of Alabama. That's the call sign for cheering your team on, so the Crimson Tide.
And of course, throughout this whole sequence, Hunter is observing and watching everything. And the wonderful thing about editing is that, and Denzel's performance in this, is he plays everything very close to the vest.
Yes.
And so you could watch this and go, Hunter appreciates the leadership qualities and skill with which Ramsay's is motivating his crew. Or you could look at this and go, Hunter is judging the sort of over-the-topness and performative elements of how and we can't know the answer, but both of those could be in his looks.
Absolutely. Like, yes, you can look at it as he's a black man under a white man's rule, so he's going to keep his feelings close to the vest. Or the other way, where he's just, kind of surveying the way this guy leads and taking notes for himself and observing it and just kind of watching it, because he is not a reactionary person. So that when the moment comes, it's shocking for us as an audience when he finally stands up to Ramsay and tells him what's up, and so that's the thing we're building towards. So I think it's smart direction to have him keep his cards close to his vest for a number of reasons.
Well, and we're going to this movie in particular is so interesting about race because it's there. It's definitely there.
100%. Anybody telling you it's not there is not using their eyes.
But there's very little where you can say that is specifically about race, because it's subtle. And so because someone coming in, if he was a white officer coming in on his first day with a scary, well-known, famous captain, he would also play his cards close to the vest. He would also sort of
possibly. I don't know. I
I am telling you, if I were hired on a new job, any new job, if I was suddenly going, you're going to be the second in command to Steven Spielberg, I would play my cards I would be observing and I would be quiet and I would listen.
Sure, you would, but there might be other people who wouldn't, and
of course, different people have different.
Well, I'm saying
reactions.
And having served with a number of black enlisted men and black officers, and had conversations with them behind the scenes about what it's like to be under the rule of white men in charge in the military. The idea of not saying too much, of not rattling the cage, of not being, argumentative, like that's a big deal. That's a huge deal.
Well, I think all of this is part of what makes this such a good movie, is that because there's the performances are amazing, but the performances also leave enough ambiguity where you can go, well, is this about race? Is this about power? Is this about class? Is this about, it doesn't just go like, boom, this is 100% what we're dealing with.
I agree. I think it's all of it, right? And I think that's what makes the film so interesting, because as you said, you can strip the race away and it's a power dynamic. You can strip the power away and it's about an old man being jealous of a young man coming up to try to threaten his authority, what he thinks threaten his authority. There's so many ways to look at this. So I agree. All of it is mixed in, though. So I want to make it, I think I'm with you, Steve. All of it is mixed in. I'm just pointing out the stuff that sticks out to me as when we're going along.
Well, I think that's what's so good. It's there. If it wasn't to some degree there, you wouldn't be able to point it out. You know what I mean? Like, that stuff is there. And the thing too is, I also think you can say this is just about two people trying to do their duty as they see it.
As they see it. Right. Exactly.
Well, and this goes to the other thing of like, we're not aware of our flaws or we frequently don't know that our flaws are motivating us to make that decision. We think we were motivated by something purely honorable, but often we're not,
Agreed.
So we have a beautiful, this is like sunset, and you see the USS Alabama sailing out to sea in the ocean, huge submarine. I mean, these things are amazing to look at. And you go, well, how exactly do we get a shot of a U.S. submarine when the Navy is not participating? Would you like to know how they did it?
Please.
In Pearl Harbor, Tony Scott stationed a helicopter and a spotter nearby watching the harbor for any time a submarine left port.
What?
And the moment it left port, they sent the helicopter out, followed it until it submerged. And that is how they got this shot. And the U.S. Navy said, you can't do that. and Bruckheimer and Simpson, and I'm sure they had their legal team on it before they do it. They're like, it's like, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but there's the classic Looney Tunes Bugs Bunny where he's playing baseball and they go, there's nothing in the rule books that says an elephant can't pitch. That's what it's like. There's no law that says you can't just film a submarine that's out to sea. And the Navy's like, damn it.
But I think that all has changed since 9/11, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
They're much more stringent about filming anything to do with the military. I just recently saw a couple of San Diego people get arrested for filming a recent charity walk because they were filming, some of the shots were too close to the base. That's here in San Diego. So it's very clear that's different from now to now,
It's just crazy to me that they guerrilla shot a submarine. It's pretty nuts.
Got to do it.
And it's on the conning tower. We're with Ramses and Hunter.
My last breath of polluted air for the next 65 days. Gonna miss it.
There's a pause, and he says, with real sincerity, I think,
it's my favorite part. Right here, right now.
Oh, no, I agree. He is absolutely revealing something about himself there, yeah.
Bravo, Hunter. Sir? You knew to shut up and enjoy the view. Most eggheads want to talk it away. You stocked this one up a couple points.
He ruined the fucking moment. He ruins the fucking moment because he needs to step on Hunter.
Because the egghead line.
Yeah, the egghead line, but also even calling out the fact that Hunter was silent. Like, why are you calling that out? You're calling that out because you want to, in a way, lead to a denigration of him by essentially throwing him in the basket of eggheads, which he's not. He's intelligent, he's educated, but of course, to Ramsay, he sees him as an egghead with no experience at war. And so what does he know?
Do you think his stock did go up for Ramses?
Fuck no.
Yeah, you and I see this totally different. Yeah. I agree about the egghead word, which I think is a little bit disparaging, but I think he's actually complimenting him and saying, your stock went up.
But he's almost saying it like, good boy, you didn't talk when you weren't
he's the boss.
To. Yeah, but you don't need to point that out. Just why can't you think that thought as a boss and go, you know what? He's gone up a few points in my head. But the fact that he has to say it to me is he's pointing it out, he's highlighting it. And I see that as a way of denigrating him and showing him who's in charge, when he doesn't have to.
To me, it's like you just complimented your underling. That was a compliment.
Okay.
Allow me to give you a tiny bit of advice.
Unsolicited, but yes.
He's the boss.
Again with the boss. He's not a boss.
The boss.
It's a military situation. It's two different things.
He's the officer and he's the captain of the ship.
He is the captain of the ship. So to
me, just like Captain Kirk has a young ensign or a young lieutenant and pulls him aside, let me give you some advice. That's what captains do when they have new officers come to serve on their ship. I think that's totally normal.
After I call you an egghead, let me give you some advice. Okay.
Well, he's got a jokey style. He's not my style.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I would never do.
He's not joking with anyone else like this on the ship. No.
He jokes. He called his crew little ducks.
Yeah, but
he's made that. I think we'll see him joke all sorts of the places.
I don't think that's a joke. Though. Little ducks is again a power move, like denigrating them, turning them into you're little ducks, and I'm gonna lead you. And so again, I'm asserting my power. Some people, he's a power hungry captain, and these are these moments that show you that he's a power hungry captain. He wants to make sure everyone knows who the boss is. You know who the real bosses are? The ones that don't need to remind you they're the boss all the time. Those are the real bosses. The other bosses are fake bosses because they rule through insecurity and fear. They don't rule through actual ability to lead. And so in these moments, and in the military does create you to be a boss in a certain way. They want you to be a boss in a certain way. And they bristle at bosses who are much more caring of the men, much more in touch, at least from my experience. And this is the time when I served, 90 through 98. So I don't know how it is now, but certainly that's what I remember from a lot of these guys is this desire to assert their authority all the time.
It's so funny because I feel like I'm in the position of defending Ramsay, and he is not my leadership style. I would never do things the way he does. No. In fact, he's more like Hoover, who I've talked about a lot, and there's a lot of problems with Mike Hoover and his leadership style, but he's also an effective leader. Hoover is.
Yeah.
And I think Ramsay is too. But this next line, because we've been jumping around, we got to get to this next line because I think this is critical, and particularly to some of the points that you've been making. He says,
if you want your own boat someday, the very worst thing you can do is worry about yourself or try to impress me. I can't stand save asses and I won't abide kiss asses. You keep your priorities straight, your mission and your men.
What do you think of that line?
You can't do things in a vacuum, right? So let's look at this entire sequence, just from the exchanges here, this most recent exchanges between the two of them, right? He says, "Oh, this is my favorite part." Great. Denzel sits there, or Hunter rather, smokes the cigar, no problem. And he smokes the cigar, even though it's his first cigar ever, as we find out.
And making him sick, probably.
And making him sick, right? But he's doing it to please the captain. But he's doing it, right? And so he's doing it, and he's quiet. But the captain goes, "Hey, let me point out how quiet you are." And he goes, "You just went up in my book." He goes, "Oh, thank you, sir." He just says, "Thank you, sir." And then he goes, "And you want some advice? Don't care about what I think." What the fuck? And this is the thing that's why he's a guy who rules by making you feel uncomfortable and not sure and unsettled. So he's constantly the person who is the most definite always. I've served under a guy like this at Collider. He loved sowing discontent. He loved making you question whether you were doing the right thing or not all the time, so that he was the one that was always seen as the boss because everyone else is caught up in their shit wondering if they're doing the right thing or not. And so for him to compliment him and then undercut him for doing the thing that he complimented him for is just a mindfuck way of ruling people or leading people, rather.
This is going to be a hell of a ride because you obviously, and I see this guy very, very differently.
Yeah.
So that'll be just interesting going forward. And I'll tell you what else is it reflects as I was trying to, because there was so little information about this movie. There are plenty of people in your camp who see this movie very much how you see it. It's clearly a valid interpretation.
Yeah.
But it is this line in specific is that what he's saying to me, this is a great message. Like putting aside what his motivation for saying it or whether it's condescending or anything like that, is what he is saying is, I don't need you to kiss my ass. I need you to do your job and protect your men and keep that straight. Is that he's saying, I want you to come in conflict with me if you disagree. That's what the line is saying.
That's what the line is saying.
Exactly. But that is clearly not. And but in my mind, and again, this is how I interpret the character, I believe that Ramsay believes that is true. Even though that it's probably mostly not true.
It's not true. It's not probably. Well, in my opinion, right? As you said, we have different opinions on this. In my opinion, it's not true because throughout the whole movie, whenever Hunter contradicts him, questions him, or possibly steps up to him, Ramsay is immediately angry. He doesn't try to find resolution. Yep. He tries to steamroll him. And as we're going to get to that moment you're talking about, it's the most obvious situation. Right. So it's all bullshit what he's telling him. But it's, in my opinion, in this turret, he is just basically trying to turn him in multiple directions so he doesn't know which way to go so he can control him better. That's what. And there's a reason he went through 8 COs because he does this with everyone. I think you can strip away race, regardless of color. I think he does this to any CO who comes on his ship.
He does. Yeah. And I think too, and again, we get into these subtleties of what's going on, is that I think in my mind, it's hypocrisy. Is that I actually think he thinks that he is the kind of person who wants to hear, critical opinions but he actually isn't. That's what I think.
No, right.
In your mind, I think it's more, I don't want to put words in your head, but what I'm hearing from you is that there's more of using this as a technique to keep people down, sort of thing.
Yes, because many quote unquote leaders do that.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate to see that.
And then this moment happens that you reference, which is,
I like that cigar.
It's good, sir. It's your first.
Yeah.
That's a fine interaction. I like that. It seems kind of friendly, that interaction.
I agree. And the thing, Denzel Washington is among the most dynamic, powerful actors to ever be on screen. And watching this performance where he's very contained is incredible, you know?
I think he's learning as well. Like Denzel said this, that he jumped at the chance to sign to be in this movie because he was going to be jousting with a master. That's what jousting with a master. That's what he said. And so to me, that's a fantastic way to describe, as a young actor who has seen this incredible actor be a part of so many classic films, to test your mettle against a guy like Gene Hackman and certainly Denzel. Now Denzel is the old master who these young actors are excited to go toe-to-toe with on screen, you know?
You know what it also shows? It's something you and I decided. I can't remember if this was in a short. I think it was in a normal episode of the show, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
But like, is the thing we talked about actors not starting at 100%, but giving their performance room. And both Hackman and Denzel understand how they're building piece by piece this conflict. When the sparks fly, they're going to fucking fly.
Yeah, man.
But we're not there yet.
Right.
We're going to be small, you know?
Right, because each little thing is a building block to that massive explosion, as you said, Stephen. It's great to see.
And then we're going to take the submarine down. And this is just, again, I could talk about editing, which in a way I really don't think I've talked about before, which is when you're setting up a montage like this, you could just have a shot of the submarine goes underwater.
Yeah.
But what Tony Scott wants to do is he wants to give you this sense of the power and the speed and the population and the crew and the skill of everything that's involved in submerging the submarine. And so, first of all, Hans Zimmer music, obviously killing it. But then when you have these shots, it's like you have someone go down the ladder. Then you have a horizontal shot where crew are running along the decks. And then you have a diagonal shot of going down one ladder one way and then diagonal going down one ladder the other way. Horizontal shot of the submarine starting to go forward and submerge. And all of these use of shot selection of the variety of camera angle and camera movement is what makes this whole thing feel so thrilling and so contained, as you're also, one thing this movie does throughout, learning kind of the systems of how these crew work together, the repeated orders, the exact specific kind of language, all the steps that they take. And it gives you a sense, the whole thing as a whole, of the incredible complexity and competence required to run a submarine.
And I like that because for all the stuff they spend the time exploring the battle going on here, they also give the audience an understanding of the scope of what they're doing and the seriousness with which they're approaching. And for you to understand what it's like to be on a ship like this, to be on a submarine like this, and the majesty of it, which I think is something that's an element of the film that hardly gets talked about when people talk about this movie.
I think, and for me at least, even more than Hunt for Red October, you have a sense of the size and the scale of the submarine. And part of that, I think, comes from, and again, I couldn't find a ton of behind-the-scenes material, but this is a huge, huge set, like 5 decks, all built, all of which is on a gimbal, which is a big thing that can tilt this huge, massive set in any direction it wants to. And that, again, gives you a tremendous sense of the power and the scale of the submarine. And we cut to, and John, I'm just going to say this right off the bat, which is that the next scene we're going to get into is one that I've taught in class, and I've taught it over and over and over again. So please forgive me if I have a lot to say about this one. But
no, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what you've got to say, for sure.
Because I think this is a scene that is one of those incredibly hard to write scenes where you need to really show all the characters and all their perspective, establish conflicts, and really show what this movie is going to be about. And we're going to do it all at this scene at the dinner table.
Yeah, exactly. And show that like not all of them agree with a certain point of view. And so when things start to go south between Hunter and Ramsay, we as the audience are wondering, what side are these guys going to take in this battle that happens in this enclosed space? So it's an exciting scene. And I think this is a scene written by Tarantino. That's my feeling. I may be wrong, but that's my feeling because of the philosophical stuff that they discuss here.
Well, and the dialogue is so perfect and it's so tight. I don't know if that's what's really hard. I mean, we can assume that some of the pop culture things that are going to pop up later, that sounds a lot like Tarantino. But this I don't know, but it's very, very possible.
Mm-hmm.
And something we've talked about many times on the Cine-Files is this screenwriting term, which is enter late and leave early, which means we don't need to see the beginning of the scene. We want to get right into the middle of the scene where the conflict is hottest. And that's what happens here with an argument over, a light topic like nuclear Armageddon. So Zimmer says,
I don't understand.
What don't you understand?
Rodchenko is a fanatic, okay? He's a potential Hitler. Somebody should just step up and shoot him.
I have no problem with that.
Good.
We started on some heavy shit, John.
I know, right? But this is, and listen, this is 30 years ago, this dialogue, but you could apply it now to some of the conversations people have out in public or on social media. Just remove Zivchenko, whatever his name is, and then replace it with some other political leader that people don't like. And it is an uncomfortable thing to say that somebody should just shoot a political leader of a country,
Well, I mean, you're in this weird thing where it's like, if you knew what Hitler was about to do and you were sure of it, well, who am very, not a pacifist, but very nonviolent, I'm like, yeah, shoot that fucker, Whereas, but the problem is we don't know.
Right.
We don't know what's going to happen next.
Right. And people assume that because if you knock out Hitler somehow, all this other stuff doesn't happen. Right. We have no idea.
We don't know.
Happen because you create a vacuum, and within that evil vacuum, something must fill it.
As Homer Simpson proved, when you go back in time, you really shouldn't touch anything. So Westergaard, and actually, this is the perfect point because the counterpoint is Westergaard, who says,
"Well, it's fanatics who make history. Hell, Patton was a fanatic. It's what made him great."
You think this guy's Patton? He's a dangerous lunatic, and he's threatening nuclear war, and he means it.
I can't help going back to, we did Patton on the show, and we spent that whole time talking about, on the one hand, how awesome he is, and on the other hand, how much of a fucking problem Patton was.
Yeah. He and this is an interesting thing because Westergaard brings it up. It's played by Rocky Carroll. And for those who know, Rocky Carroll, of course, has been in a number of things, movie and TV wise. Most notably for Rock, he was Rock's brother on that series with Charles S. Dutton, and then a part of the NCIS world as well, recently on CBS. So a really good established actor, and I like that he's the lone lower ranked black officer here, and he's the one that brings up an issue with Patton, which is interesting. And Dougherty, who's much more of the aggressive, embarrassed people, like he just did the young sailor in the bus. He's the guy that's like offended by what anyone would say about Patton because he's the kind of guy that only sees that Patton got results, not how he got the results, not that he slapped people, which Dougherty probably thought was a cool thing. And it's all about like, well, he's an American hero. How dare you question him? And so there's this thing that you cannot question America or anything American or somehow, as he's going to say later, you're a communist. So you're seeing the beginning of some frayed edges between these guys who probably had these kinds of conversations a number of times.
It's so funny seeing this movie after The Sopranos. Because like when I saw this the first time, I'd never heard of James Gandolfini.
Right.
I thought he was great in this role, which he absolutely is. But like totally seeing like, oh yeah, I could see how this actor is going to be able to play among the greatest mob characters ever, put on film or TV,
And Tony Scott loves him because he used him in True Romance as well.
Yeah. All right. And I think this is so important, is that the next line comes from Wepps. And what's so interesting is like you and I could have conversations about whether or not we should ever use nuclear weapons or about the Cold War, about things like that. But you and I are not actually on the boat where they have the key to launch the nuclear war. And not only are these people, they're not having an abstract conversation about nuclear war. They're having a conversation about we're going to be the ones who have to do it.
Right.
And Wepps is the person who actually has the key. Right. He is if we're going to destroy part of the world, Wepps is going to be part of it. And he says,
what's that make us since we're the only nation ever dropped a nuclear bomb on anyone?
Isn't that interesting? And it's a fascinating thing as nuclear power becomes a thing we talk about more and more nowadays in new and interesting ways about who has nuclear weapons and who doesn't. This idea of sometimes I think it's hard for Americans to understand what it's like to be born in and raised in a country where you don't have access to nuclear weapons, when in fact the United States has made it an effort to make sure you never get access to nuclear weapons. I don't care what country you grew up in. It must be an interesting experience to grow up seeing that the United States is the country that has a lot of nuclear weapons. I'm not sure if they have the most nuclear weapons, but they dictate the power.
We have the
We
most.
do. Okay, then they dictate the power structure in the world. And so it's interesting to hear Webb say that, because it is a logical thing for Webb to say, who is much more of a thinker, I think, than some of these guys, which is why he's so conflicted throughout the movie when stuff starts to go down. And so it's interesting that he's the one that brings this up. It's a valid point, too.
I don't know that Webb has nightmares, but there's a good chance Webb has nightmares.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
He seems very hanged on, like the weight is on him. Even from the opening scenes with Hunter, he's got a little more of a kind of weight to how he's delivering his performance.
It makes us a prime target. I mean, there's half a dozen other third world countries with atom bombs who'd love to drop one on us.
That's right. That's why we should drop one on them. What are you, a communist? You have a problem with us dropping nuclear bombs in Japan?
Shut up, Cockney.
And that opens the door to, in a little bit, to Ramsay responding to this.
Well, and this is what I find so interesting about this scene up to this point is that our main characters, Ramsay and Hunter, have both just been quietly observing the other officers. And I think that makes perfect sense for both of them.
Yeah. Hunter is new, and so he's observing and taking notes and seeing who acts like what. And of course, in his Webbs, but everyone else. And I think he served with Westergaard in the past when they meet each other. But everyone else is kind of new too, so he's just observing, seeing where they're landing on all this stuff. And probably he enjoys a robust debate. Ramsay knows these guys, so he's probably heard this debate a million times in different variations over different topics. So it's fascinating for him to sit back. And I wonder, Steve, what do you think? Do you think he's sitting back because this is just allowing his men to blow off some steam, or do you think he's sitting back wondering if Hunter is going to weigh in and what Hunter might say?
I think it's absolutely the latter. I mean, I said, I've watched this scene a lot. And the first thing is that if you watch the reaction shots that they cut to with Gene Hackman, he enjoys watching his guys.
Yes, right. Yes, no, yes. Absolutely.
He is definitely, he likes them. He cares about them. He likes that they're having this kind of debate. And 100% all he is waiting for is to see where Hunter is and who, because this is as important as we just said at the very beginning of this movie, three most powerful people in the world. This is number 3.
Yeah.
And so he needs to know where his crew members, where his senior officer is going to be.
Right. Where their loyalties lie. It's a great point. Yeah. And he's almost like, Steve, you're a college football fan. I'm a college football fan. It's almost like a coach in the old days who would let the defense, the offense get into fisticuffs for a little bit before breaking it up just to see
exactly
what they're like, what they would do in a stressful moment, Yeah.
Well, and that's why I think this is such a great scene. And then, I my guess is that you've had this experience where you've been on stage and you're in a scene where it's kind of fast paced, where it's going line, and then there's just one actor who takes a really long pause.
Yes.
Wait, and then they say their line, and all the attention just flows to that one person in that one moment.
Yep, 100%. It's usually the most powerful person in the scene, too.
Yeah. Well, they are now. And that's the thing. That's what happens at this moment. So we've had all of the officers arguing and bickering, and we kind of built to a little moment with a laugh. And then Ramsay gets up and very calmly walks over to refill his coffee, and then finally turns and out of nowhere says,
"You think it was a mistake, Mr. Hunter?
Sir?
Using the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki."
And then the scene, which has been fast-paced and quick, stops. All of the officers you see in each of them shots, them turn to look at Hunter. And what's really great, and it's just a micro flick of Denzel's eyes, but you see the moment that he looks and notices that all the officers have now turned to him and are waiting to hear his opinion.
The observer has become the observee.
Yep. That's what's, and I'm telling you, both with Gene Hackman, I mean, with every actor in the scene, but every single cut to Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington, you can see the little micro movements of their reactions to what's going on.
I have to feel that Tony Scott was in heaven directing this movie. Having these two guys, like Hackman, of course, not in his young prime as an actor, but still in his prime as it's like a renaissance for Hackman here in the 90s. And then with Denzel up and coming into his real power as an actor. So he must have been enjoying the amount of footage he got from these guys and the level of acting he was getting in a film like that.
Well, if I thought that, sir, I wouldn't be here.
As Hackman will say in a moment, that's a complicated way to answer that question.
Yeah. It's a political way to answer that question.
Interesting way you put that.
How'd I put it, sir?
Very carefully.
And everyone laughs, but watch Denzel's laugh.
Yeah.
Which he laughs, but then his eyes are watching the other officers to see how they are reacting to his laugh.
Right.
I'm sure you've been the new guy and you show up and someone kind of makes a joke a little bit at your expense. You can't push back.
When I look at the film and I look at the character of Hunter, right? You have to watch it in both ways. One, you have to watch it in a universal way, but I think you also have to account for the fact that he is a new black officer on a ship. And so, as we said earlier, the idea of him wanting to rock the boat, just as the new guy alone, is a reason to just kind of observe and not say too much because you don't know where things are going to turn and you don't know who you really trust in that situation. But then as a black man serving with a majority white crew, you also want to be careful because you don't know what people are going to say and how they're going to take what you do and how you react to things because some people are looking for a reason not to like a black officer or a black serviceman. It happens. I'm not saying everybody. I'm saying some. So the fact that Denzel's walking that line with playing this thing as a universal way, but also possibly shades as a black man on a ship like this, I think is really interesting, the performance he delivers. And yes, you're right. Looking at the guys, and I don't know if that's directed or if that's Denzel instinctively thinking to look at the guys, how they react to his laugh, because I think he's a guy who doesn't like to be observed, but he likes to observe. And there are people like that, right? And I think I think Hunter is very much like that. You know, he's not a reactionary guy. So he's going to wait for other people and then he's going to make his move. And but he doesn't like it when people are watching him because he likes to keep his secrets to himself.
Well, and one thing I'll say is that whether it was Tony Scott or Denzel Washington, it's also the editor because there's 5 takes of that reaction.
Yeah.
And that's what this is where I actually do feel bad about me not giving more specifics about editing because here's where I can see it. Here's where I can see is that little eye flick, these little motions that I know as an editor, I'm looking for that.
Yeah.
You know, because those are so powerful.
Exactly. And Chris LeBenzon is the editor on this and certainly deserves credit, as you said, Steve, for these little moments.
You do qualify your remarks. Somebody asked me if we should have bombed Japan. A simple yes. By all means, sir. Drop that fucker. Twice.
And all the officers laugh and enjoy that.
And it's a show. As you said earlier, which I think really astutely, Steve, he is playing the character of Captain Ramsay. I don't mean Gene Hackman. I mean Ramsay is playing the character of Captain Ramsay. And he's going to upstage his officer because he feels intellectually deficient in comparison to Hunter, in my opinion. And so he's not going to miss any opportunity to undercut him publicly or privately. And here in this moment, he tries to trap him with the question, and Hunter answers politically, which I think ruffles Ramsay a little bit. And so he's going to come back, just like he said with the Arabian situation. Oh, I'm much more simplistic. It's straightforward to me, blah, 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 you know, and it's actually not. And it shouldn't be. And I don't want people in power who think that using nuclear weapons should be just a simplistic decision, you know? And so to me, it's an his comment is actually way more irresponsible and also political in its own way because he's trying to play to what he feels is the majority opinion in the room, you know? And so it's political in its own way because it serves his needs.
Well, I mostly agree with what you're saying. The only place that and again, I will say this again, Ramsay is not my kind of leadership. Like that's not, I am not suggesting that this is what I think one should do, but it's also, he is saying, this is how I want my officers to behave on my ship, which is I say, someone gives me an order. I say, yes, sir. Drop that fucker twice. That's what he wants from his officers. Now, whether or not he should want that, or whether or not you want officers, how much they're going to push back or how much you're going to discuss it, he has said over and over again, he wants a chain of command that is like the order comes down the chain of command and everybody says, yes, sir. That is what I want.
Right. Because what he wants is power.
No, what he wants is this duty. You don't think his duty to serve the military is important to Ramsay?
Oh, I think it is, as long as it coincides with his opinion on how he should be doing it. That's the difference. And you say this whole thing, but then this is the same Ramsay that at the beginning gave a speech was like, hey, he may be the commander-in-chief, but I'm the guy who runs the ship. No, actually, the commander-in-chief tells you what to fucking do. And that's the thing. So if he's like,
and when you get an order from the commander,
twice, when he says that stuff, he's playing to the popular opinion. But if the president told him not to drop the bomb and he wanted to drop the bomb, I guarantee you he would reconsider that position.
So what he's saying is obey the commander in chief. That is what he is saying.
No, he's saying in that moment, yes, here he is saying that. But in the beginning, when he's giving that speech to his little ducks, quote unquote, the way he's saying the commander in chief may be in charge of the country, but I'm in charge of the boat. He's essentially implying I rule what happens on this ship. He is not, and he's undercutting the power of the commander in chief because he's saying he decides what happens on his ship, not necessarily the president. He's implying that, and
he's not saying that I would launch nuclear bombs against the president's order. That is not what he's. This is not the Sterling Hayden course in character in Strangelove.
Wait. What, I don't know what you mean by that. I'm not saying he would launch the bombs against the president's order. I'm saying if
you said if he wanted to launch the bombs, he would do it against the president's order.
I literally did not what I say that. I did not say that at all. I said if he wouldn't necessarily follow the commander in chief's opinion initially if he disagreed with it. So all the stuff he's saying right now is all stuff to play the character of Captain Ramsay. Because later, when Hunter calls him out correctly and tells him what he needs to do, Ramsay is the first one to violate the rules of conduct, to violate the rules of the ship by turning it around on Hunter and not adhering to what Hunter said, because Hunter is correct.
Well, let's table that discussion until we get there, because that is obviously important, because that is the central thing of the
I think Ramsay only does what he wants to do, and if he is going to do, if he's ordered to do something he doesn't want to do, he begrudgingly does it, or he fights against it, or pushes against it, or makes little comments under his breath to the people he trusts. He's that kind of leader. I know these guys. I've served with guys like this. I know guys like this. I've even worked for guys like this. To me, this is what he is. But, like I said, different opinions.
I don't mean to suggest that you're indecisive, Mr. Hunter. Not at all. Just complicated. Of course, that's the way the Navy wants you. Me, they want it simple.
Sure they did.
Well, I think that's true. I think there is truth to that. And I've heard this from many. In fact, we're still hearing these debates today of old school military versus new school military. Should we be more sensitive? Should we be more intellectual? Should we be more following orders? I hear these discussions going on right now. This is a common thread.
Right. But you don't hear, but what all the great military leaders are intellectual men. All the great there's no dumb military leaders. The intellectual military leaders are intelligent. People may not like it, but it's true. They're very smart about what they're doing. They're very smart about how they do it. So this idea that they just want an automaton to just rubber stamp any order is nonsense. The military tells you that straight up. Like, yes, they want you to follow orders, but they also make it very clear that if you have a conscientious issue with an order, you are to bring it up to your superiors for discussion. So this idea that they just want me to be simple is nonsense. And he doesn't see himself as simple. That would be
totally agree.
Fool's errand to believe that about Ramsay.
Well, you certainly fooled them, sir.
Because I think he's seeing through all these moves that he's making.
Of course he is. He knows what what Ramsay's trying to do to him.
Be careful there, Mr. Hunter. It's all I got to rely on, being a simple-minded son of a bitch.
And again, I totally agree with you. He is not remotely a simple-minded son of a bitch.
But he has to play that for his men, because the men want a guy who's like very, it's like security. Men want to believe when they serve in the military, the person in charge of them is very clear and knows what he's supposed to do, so that you fall in line because you trust him. I agree. That's what it is. Yeah.
I agree. And I agree. But in particular on the submarine, where they have to do a terrible thing.
Yes. 100%.
And so they have to have that trust in the captain that he understands what he's doing and why.
And I do want to make it clear. I may have my issues with Ramsay, but clearly the United States in this scenario, in this movie, and the commander-in-chief trusts him to run a nuclear submarine. You know what I'm saying? So there is a massive level of trust that they have in Ramsay, whatever my issues may be about how he rules the roost in that sub. It's clear that the president and the Department of Defense trust him to be in charge of something that could destroy thousands, if not millions of people,
Well, and I think that his officers trust him, and I think the men trust him. Mm-hmm. I think this is, regardless of what I think about many of the choices he makes, and this goes to like things we've said about movies. There are all sorts of directors who are assholes whose behavior I dislike, who I will still acknowledge are really good directors.
Yes, and with
You
really
know,
good movies. Yeah.
And I think Ramsay is a really good sub captain doing what the way he wants to do it. It is not leadership things that I like necessarily.
100%. The way he wants to do it. I think
Yes.
you're right.
Well, he's the captain, man. That's what being the captain is.
It's a version of it, yes.
Yes, absolutely. He says, and this is the center of the whole movie.
Yeah.
Rickover gave me my command, a checklist, a target, and a button to push. All I had to know is how to push it. They'd tell me when. They seem to want you to know why.
The way he's framed his existence, whether or not it's the truth, is my job is to be an instrument in the chain of command.
Yes.
You know,
that's what he wants Hunter to think about him. But of course, Hunter sees through him.
I would hope they'd want us all to know why, sir.
That's the whole movie. The whole movie, this is the plot of the film. One guy gets an order and says, my job is to follow this order. And the other guy goes, wait, hold on. I think we need to know if this is correct. I think we need to know why. And that's where the conflict of the movie is.
Yeah.
Well, let me say my next thought, and I could see the wheels turning. Is like, this to me is what, and it's come up a few times on the Cine-Files. This is what I would call a thesis film.
Oh, yeah.
Which is an idea where we're going to ask a question, and then the whole movie is going to be exploring that question. So when Harry Met Sally is, can men and women be friends without the sex thing getting in the way? It's the very beginning of the movie, we ask that question. Bullets Over Broadway is about art versus humans. There's, like The Nature of Hope in Shawshank. Like, there's movies that pose a particular question.
Right.
And this one is about, should the military just follow the order, or should we know why?
At the Naval War College, it was metallurgy and nuclear reactors, not 19th century philosophy.
This is all coded language. This is what the term is now, coded language. This is all coded language from, a brusque, old school guy trying to essentially, how can I say this correctly? I hope I say this correctly so people get what I'm talking about. There is a belief amongst a lot of these gruff, quote unquote, gruff men who a lot of times are really insecure people who can't deal with their feelings, to undercut people who are educated and to call them, essentially imply they're wussies. And it's bullying in a different format, but it is coded language to undercut anyone who's educated as somehow less of a man. We saw that recently, right? Some rhetoric from the White House. Well, we need to train people to be electricians and plumbers more than we need LGBTQ people graduating with dance degrees, right? It's that kind of undercutting of art or intelligence or things of that nature. And so you have this belief. And so this is what I think Ramsay and Hunter represent. And I think it's fascinating to watch them go back and forth, and especially Ramsay consistently bringing up ways to undercut Hunter in public ways throughout the whole movie and undercut his intelligence in public ways throughout the movie. Oh, I'm just a button pusher. They want thinking. Nonsense.
Well, and it's made particular nonsense by the next line, I think, because he's just said, I wasn't taught 19th century philosophy. Mm-hmm. And then his next line is,
war is a continuation of politics by other means. Von Clausewitz.
Who's von Clausewitz? A 19th century philosopher.
Yes.
So he just said, I don't know anything about these things, and then shows that he does. And I think so again, this is my interpretation. I'm not saying that this is your interpretation, is that at the very beginning, when he asked that question, should we have dropped the bomb in Japan? He didn't get the answer he wanted. Then he said the answer he wanted. And his second in command is continually not giving him the drop that fucker twice answer. And so he keeps pushing, and he's going to keep pushing until he breaks him down and gets him to be who he wants him to be as the second in command.
Wants to control him, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, they are tasked with doing among the most difficult and horrible things a human could imagine having to do. So being a leader and being concerned about where your second in command is reasonable. I don't like the way he's doing it, but I understand what he's trying to do without necessarily putting it on things I agree with you about his insecurities.
Right.
I think, sir, that what he was actually trying to say was a little more complicated.
And again, watch the way the laugh goes around the room.
Yep.
And watch the way Denzel Washington sees the laugh going around the room, doesn't like this joke at his expense, and then has to join in on the laugh.
Again, the way he walks that line, again.
Oh, yeah.
Universally, as just a guy who's coming onto the new guy, being made fun of by the people who've already been on this boat for a while. Even if two of the people are one he served with, one he's friends with, he still feels out of place. And so, and then also as a black man watching these men laugh at him, right? And even if it includes another black man, it still is a feeling there. And so he laughs after they laugh as a way to try to get along, and he doesn't want to cause a problem between him and Ramsay, but he'll be damned if he's going to be the subject of ridicule from someone he's starting to increasingly see through with his tactics. But he still has to respect him. That's his job as the chain of command, is to respect the captain. Yeah.
I think this is, we have seen Denzel Washington as among the most dynamic performers in the history of film. I mean, someone whose power could literally blow other actors off the screen if he so chooses. And what so impresses me in his performance is so much restraint.
Yes.
There's so much quietness. And you see, it's everything you just described, all those wheels turning. Yeah. And I think he's trying to walk a line between, he is not going to quit. He's not going. He knows that the captain would like him to back down,
right?
But he won't do that. But then he's trying to stand up for himself in a way that isn't. It's just what you said. He doesn't want to make waves in this new situation.
Yeah.
And so what's so great is after they kind of joke at him, is you see him sit up in his chair, and it's sort of like, okay, I'm not going to back down on this.
Yeah. You want to dance? Let's dance.
Yes, the purpose of war is to serve a political end, but the true nature of war is to serve itself.
That's a hell of a line, John.
It's a great line. And and you're so great to point out his physical performance of the line. It's really important. It conveys that these guys laughed at him because, look, I think in some level, Hunter knows he's smarter than everybody on that boat. And I think in that moment, these guys laughing at him, people laughing at people who are educated happens all the time in life, no matter what age you are. And so you've got to find a way to recapture a little bit of the power when that happens to you, if the opportunity arises. Hunter does that in this moment, straightening his body out and then saying the line that he says and in engaging in the conflict now with Ramsay, because Ramsay's essentially pulled out the battlefield and put it on the table.
And then laughter plays such an interesting part in this scene because there's laughter at his response.
Yes.
And Ramsay laughs, but it is not a happy laugh at all.
Nope.
You could see him get more and more pissed off. And Gandolfini's reaction is great too, because he laughs, and again, this would be me interpreting that shot. His laugh is, oh, Captain's going to destroy this guy.
Right. That kind of half smirk, like, oh shit, now let's see what happens. He almost gets like almost a maniacal glee out of it, Yeah.
What was our introduction to his character? Pushing down someone who is ranked below him and has no power.
100%.
So that, where did he learn that from?
Yep. Wow.
He's
probably had that his whole life. But
probably
from his dad. Probably from his dad.
Fair point.
In other words, the sailor most likely to win the war is the one most willing to part company with the politicians and ignore everything except the destruction of the enemy.
Well, that kind of goes to maybe your point of him ignoring the president if he so chose.
Exactly.
Which, I'm sorry, you didn't specifically say that. So
No. But I do think all I was basically saying was that if he received any order he didn't agree with, he would not necessarily do it immediately. And that's the only point I'm trying to make.
And then he says
that you'd agree with that.
It's kind of a sentence where you would think there's a question mark at the end of it, but he doesn't deliver it that way. He delivers it, that is a statement. You'd agree with that.
Yeah.
Because he wants Hunter to say, yes, sir, I'd agree with that. And then we would be done.
Right.
But Hunter doesn't quit.
I'd agree that that's what Clausewitz was trying to say.
But you wouldn't agree with it?
No, sir, I do not.
And man, Hackman, his mix of that twisted smile in this moment and anger is just palpable.
No, I just think that in the nuclear world, true enemy can't be destroyed.
Again, these lines are amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that Hunter is almost rallying to the occasion now. You know what I mean? Like he's really sitting up and going, I'm not backing down on this.
Right.
There's I always call it a tennis cut in editing, where you see someone look from the left to the right or the right to the left, and Gandolfini's eyes flick over to Hackman and all of the attention to like what's going to happen now, you know? And he clinks a glass and says,
"Attention on deck. Von Clausewitz will now tell us exactly who the real enemy is."
Again, Coded language meant to undercut him completely in front of the other men.
Agreed. And in particular, the way it's shot, because what we haven't said is this whole room is surrounded by reflective surfaces. It's like they're sitting in a mirrored room, which is ridiculously hard to shoot because it means, lights and camera, everything has to be out of the way. But in this particular moment, when Hackman goes, Vaughn, there's the shot of him, and you can see all of his officers essentially behind him because he's sitting in front of a reflective surface. So it feels as if the entire crew is now looking at Denzel in this moment. And there's a pause. And again, the laughter is just so interesting to me in this scene because this is all still nice.
Yeah.
It's not officially a confrontation.
No.
We're all just talking here.
Yeah.
But we're not.
We're just talking here, Dale. Yeah.
Yeah. And he gathers himself up and says,
In my humble opinion, in the nuclear world, the true enemy is war itself.
Third fucking banger of a line.
It's amazing. Because he's right.
Yep.
Because anybody thinking we're going to win a nuclear war is out of their fucking minds. There will be devastation on all sides.
But that's also, is that what you want to hear from the person who's one of the top 2 people in charge of launching nuclear weapons?
I know that I would want to hear that because I would be comfortable knowing that he is considering all the possible options before he hits the button.
I agree with you. That's how I feel too.
Yeah. This is why I got out of the military after 8 years.
And Ramsay takes a long look at him, sucking on that cigar, blows the smoke out of his nose, which is awesome. And then what I love too, the final shot of Denzel, I would describe it, and I don't know how you feel about it looking at it. To me, it is very neutral in the sense that it's not like some of those shots from Gandolfini where there's like, oh, he's angry, he's this, he's that. And here, he just is looking at Ramsay.
Yeah.
And so what I love about that choice is that it could be, you could interpret, because I've looked at this shot a lot, like I said, is that you could interpret it as I've stood up to you.
Yeah.
You could interpret the look as like, oh shit, maybe I went too far. You could interpret that look as I really hate this guy. Like, because it's so neutral, it allows us to kind of put ourselves into it, you know?
Yeah. What I see is a man who's like, damn it. I got it. This is what it's going to be.
Yeah.
That's what I see is, damn it, this is what it's going to be. And almost disappointment, because again, he's probably heard so many great things about this guy's ability, but here he comes in. And remember, this is very important to remember because as again, you strip away all the race of this, you can strip it all away. Earlier, Doherty, Gandolfini's character, says that Ramsay has gone through 8 XOs. They're even laughing about the fact that the most recent XO claimed to have appendicitis, which none of them seem to believe by their laughter. And so this is something Ramsay does. He has to undercut anyone who would have any sort of authority or push back on him at any moment. And so this whole scene is him kind of kicking the tires on how far he can go with Hunter in front of the men and purposely undercutting him in front of the men so that they know that if there's any conflicts between him and Hunter down the road, they will lean towards Ramsay over Hunter, which I imagine has happened in the past with other XOs on his ship with this crew.
I think one of the key places where you and I diverge, and the statement that you've made is perfectly backed up by the script. It's perfectly backed up by things that we see. So it's not me saying that you're wrong, but it's going, well, is he someone who always undermines people under him, or is he particularly concerned about Hunter for these particular reasons? In other words, like how much of he's gone through this number of XOs is because he is regularly an asshole who undermines people, and how much of it is it just kind of a joke, and that's, and your interpretation of it, like I said, makes perfect sense. I see it kind of less that way, but not for, I don't have evidence to convince you of it,
Right. No, because I see that it's very clear that the movie, in my opinion, right, because it's subjective. In my opinion, it's clear to me that Tony Scott wants you to feel like this guy is a guy who, again, he's a complicated character because I think he does care for his men. I think he does enjoy serving in the military and has enjoyed his time in the military. But I also think he's a guy that will not take any kind of contradiction of his opinion on anything in a military setting. My belief is that he has children who maybe don't talk to him that much. Maybe there's a divorce in the past. I don't know if they say any of that in the movie.
They do. Yeah. There's a line about that's why his life left him.
Yeah. See, so this is a guy who does not see or does not want to be in an equal relationship in any stage of his life. He must be the head dog. And that is a thing that comes through in certain moments. So when I hear the XO line at the beginning of the movie, to me, I'm like, yeah, because this guy rides these XOs into the ground because he feels like they're not people that are on his level. And he feels like he shouldn't have to listen to these people when they serve on his ship. And God forbid this guy get a female XO. Lord God Almighty. I don't know what that experience would be like.
We cut to a scene where we just see life on the ship. And I think it's very different from how we might expect, including, everyone's singing Nowhere to Run is playing, and we see crew members dancing, having fun. And one of the crew members we see in this sequence is Steve Zahn.
Yeah, Steve Zahn, right at the beginning of his career, because he'd just been in Reality Bites the year before, and he was about to be in That Thing You Do, which a lot of people love. So the 90s was really where you found Steve Zahn in interesting places, like The Object of My Affection, Out of Sight. Remember, just like 3 years later, which is a really interesting film. Then he's in You've Got Mail. And so he's a guy who's done a lot of interesting things throughout the 90s, really establishing himself before he starts to take off in a number of high-profile projects and bigger leads in the 2000s going forward. So a fantastic actor who I think, Steve, people don't give a lot of credit to. They just smile and love him, but they don't really appreciate how good he is in so many different types of movies and TV shows,
Yeah, that's what's so cool about movies of this, a particular era where you see someone coming up.
Oh, yeah.
It's always a lot of fun.
And there's so many in this cast. So many in this cast.
We also see Hunter running because, I think maybe running off a bit of his anger after having dealt with the previous scene.
Yeah.
And then we see a fire start in the galley, and it is genuinely scary.
Fire in the galley! Fire in the galley! Chief of the watch, sound the general alarm!
And Hunter, without missing a step, runs straight to the fire and is immediately putting on his gear and go ask about the kill switch. And he goes straight into the fire, just wearing he's still in his sweats with a thing to cover his head. And he goes straight in through explosions, and he's the one who gets the kill switch.
So if you were watching this movie, right, for the first time, and you see this intellectual battle between supposedly the gruff, no-nonsense Ramsay and the intellectual thinker in Hunter, this scene is important for you to see that Hunter is a guy who runs to the fire, not away from it. Doesn't get scared, doesn't shirk it, doesn't get lost in a philosophical discussion about whether you should run into it. He's a thinker who will act when he needs to act, and will think when he needs to think. And so I like that they do this right after this dinner scene, so that you have more layers to Hunter as well.
Because I think it's showing us that he is the full picture.
Yes,
there's zero hesitation.
Yeah.
He's he is decisive and physical and brave.
Yep.
Physically courageous.
100%.
We're up on the bridge and we hear that the fire's been contained.
Initiate weapon system readiness test. Aye, sir.
And then we're down back with Hunter, who's giving orders to take care of the fire. I mean, they literally just put it out when we see these red EAM letters flashing. And by the way, all these details are important.
Yeah.
We're going to establish all these things and understand how they work.
Alert 1, man battle stations, missile for weapon systems readiness test. Spin up all missiles.
What the hell is he running a missile drill now for?
And he says it publicly in front of some other guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a misstep. That's a misstep.
It totally, I think it totally is. And B, the dude was literally just fighting a fire.
Yeah, right.
That's something throughout this whole movie that I think people don't think enough about is this is unbelievably stressful and difficult. And people don't make perfect decisions. Even really good people don't make perfect decisions in incredibly stressful and difficult situations.
Totally.
And we see, because now we're in the midst of this drill, and we see all these people running in all these different directions, including Hunter running up the stairs. And we go through this system that we're going to see to verify whether or not these things are correct, which is that we see them get a printout, and Zimmer and Westergaard consult, and they report to Ramsay.
Sir, we have a properly formatted emergency action message for weapon system readiness test, sir.
I concur, sir.
Where's the XO?
And Hunter shows up, out of breath.
Sir, good of you to make it, Mr. Hunter.
No question about the fire or what just happened or where he's been at all.
Interesting.
I like, Denzel's little choice that he's still coughing because he was just in a fire.
Yeah.
We say, get the authenticator. And then we see again the process, which is they break this plastic thing, which is the authenticator. And this is and then they read the letters off to confirm that it's correct. We hear
Set condition 1, SQ for WSRT. This is the captain. This is an exercise.
Set condition 1 SQ for WSRT. This is the XO. This is an exercise.
Captain, that fire in the galley could still flare.
Now's not the time.
What do you think of calling the drill in the middle of this emergency?
I think he did it on purpose.
Of course he did it on purpose.
Of course.
Yeah.
I think he knew about the fire and he wanted to do this. I think he probably
you think he did you didn't think he did the fire on
purpose?
purpose?
No. I think he knew about the fire.
Yes.
And maybe people reported back to him what Hunter was doing and how he behaved. And so he calls this to kind of undercut it and to showcase that he is the person that people need to think about, right? Because if you have an officer who runs into the fire and gets the kill switch and stops all this from happening, that's a brave thing. The men are going to start to see him differently. So what happens when you are threatened by someone? Sometimes if you're a really insecure person, and you're threatened by someone, you want to do something immediately that undercuts that person's power and reestablishes you as the top dog in the situation. So I think he purposely calls the drill in order to undercut any of the men talking about how great Hunter is in the fire situation and that he's still the captain of the ship.
It's so funny because you're actually watching a different movie.
No, I'm watching the same movie.
Well, no, but like
just watching it from two different places.
Sure. Yeah. But that's what's interesting is you take like one or two things that you decide about the character. I don't mean that you decide. I mean that I decide, that one decides about the character, and then that changes the shape of everything you see after that.
But I think actually everything that is happening is making it clear to me what this isn't one or two things. It's everything he's doing makes it very clear to me what kind of character he is.
See, and in my mind is that there are many times where there were disasters on the, fuck ups on the ship, and he always runs a drill right in the middle because I believe him at his word. That is the time. There's confusion on the ship. This is not something to be feared in combat. This is the time to run a drill. I'm not saying I agree with the choice,
right?
But I never have seen it as specifically about Hunter. But I totally see what you're saying. The evidence you've presented completely makes sense for that motivation. I've watched this movie dozens of times. It never occurred to me that this drill was to take attention away from Hunter. Despite that, I understand it. It makes sense what you're saying.
But you're adding stuff. You don't know that he's done these drills in the middle of situations and all that. You're assuming that, right? So
you don't know that he has particularly undermined XOs repeatedly in order to keep his power.
I think it's right. I don't know that because I haven't seen a scene with that, but you have a line where it's pretty implied that that's that he's gone through a lot of XOs, and the fact that his men are snickering about it, to me, it makes it very clear the intention of that line.
Right. I like I said, I understand the evidence you're presenting.
Yeah.
It's just never how I've seen the movie. It'll be interesting to see how other people listening go like, oh, I've always seen it John's way or Steve's way or some other way.
Or some other way. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But the dismissiveness of Hunter in this moment is not cool.
The dismissing of Hunter, is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's on purpose. Again, that's on purpose. He is dismissing Hunter after he's done this brave thing. Instead of saying to Hunter, it's amazing what you did, Hunter, down there to the kill switch. I heard you went through the fire. Thank you for doing that. Instead of giving him his flowers, he dismisses it.
And again, all we're doing is we're repeating the line because the captain says the line, the XO says the line, but you can see a little look to Hunter from Gene Hackman that is not pleased and a little hesitation in the way that Hunter delivers the repetition of the line. It's all small stuff.
Weapons con, simulate pressurizing all tubes.
Weapons con, simulate pressurizing all tubes.
And you see that Hackman notices that little hesitation in Hunter's voice. And this is what happens when you have great actors working.
Mm-hmm. I think this is the most formidable XO he's had on his ship ever.
100%. I agree.
Yeah. We can agree on that. Yes.
Yeah. and this is the thing about this. We're going to hear this throughout this movie has so much orders and orders repeated and orders and the same lines that we hear over and over again. And why is it dramatic? And I think one of the interesting things I felt watching it, which is this most recent time was and I think I mentioned this to you, is there's Star Trek references in this. And I went, oh, this is a Star Trek movie.
Yeah.
You know, like this is conflicts within a crew who are in general trying to do the right thing.
Right.
You know, who are competent, intelligent people, you know? And so one of the things about this is where Star Trek, when it gets really bad, is when you have technobabble. And you just have a bunch of actors who have to say a bunch of shit that doesn't make any sense. Like we have to refocus the dilithium array in order to, create a metastatic, multiphasic shield, whatever, you know, right? They had to say some shit and then someone else says some other weird shit. And it's just boring as fuck. The reason that this isn't is that even though Hunter is just repeating a line from Gene Hackman, the way that he repeats it and the looks between them shows all of these repetitions have tension and conflict and all this stuff with them, so it never becomes boring.
Well, this is interesting too, because if you look at the writers, and because the Star Trek stuff, we know Tarantino's a big Star Trek guy, so that might have been a way that he did the pass and kind of honed what Michael Schiffer and Richard P. Henrick produced with their overall script. He might have honed some things, added some things in terms of the Star Trek approach to it. Would be interesting because if you look at Michael Schiffer's resume as a writer, first of all, he's dealt with a lot of issues dealing with black characters. He wrote Lean on Me, the Morgan Freeman film, which is one of my favorite 1980s films that hardly anybody talks about. He wrote Colors, the gang film with Sean Penn and Robert Duvall, but then moves into military stuff with Peacemaker, Four Feathers, and then he wrote 3 versions of the Call of Duty game before he was a story consultant on something called The Painted Bird. So he has military experience and he has experience writing films that deal with racial issues in their that is a huge part of their films. And so he's an interesting but nowhere in there is any kind of Star Trek stuff or any kind of Star Trek influence. So you wonder, is this coming from those two guys? And Henrik has even less of a resume. So you wonder, are these two guys the ones who brought the Star Trek stuff, or is this part of Tarantino's past to clean up the script?
I really wish
I kind of lean towards the Tarantino thing in my mind, but I don't know.
I really wish to know because mostly Tarantino sounds like Tarantino.
Yeah.
And so I'm very curious of his ability to, and I'm sure he can do it. You know, the guy is an unbelievable writer to write in a slightly less Tarantino way, you know?
Yeah. Well, as cool as True Romance is, it's not necessarily a Tarantino-esque type script.
Yeah.
There are elements of it that are much more mainstream, and that's what Tony Scott did with that script. You know?
So we continue to go through the drill, including seeing Weps down at the weapons, and we see interesting little details that he sets it for 14 minutes. He actually has a big analog clock that he moves the hands on to make it 14 minutes. All details that are going to come back later.
Control, sick bay. Chief Petty Officer Marichek is undergoing cardiac arrest.
Ramsay immediately goes on the PA.
Gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? We received word that one of our shipmates is experiencing a medical problem. We're terminating the drill.
And again, I go, the second that there was actually a real problem, he killed the drill.
He's
very because he's decisive, you know. And we go down to the galley where we see them stop CPR and that they actually failed. And I like the little moment where he kind of pats the medical chief officer on the back and said it's okay.
Yeah.
Because this is brutal, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
And then it is very clear that Hunter is supposed to follow him to his quarters. I don't even think anything is said, but they know that's what has to happen.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Hunter, do you think I was wrong to run that drill?
Not necessarily, sir.
Do you think I got that man killed?
No, sir. One thing had nothing to do with the other. It was an accident.
Do you think Hunter believes that?
That's a really good question. I hadn't even considered that.
I'll tell you what I think, if you want a moment to process.
Sure.
I think if I just judged it based on this scene alone, I would think that Hunter fully believes that.
Yeah.
But later on with Weps, he kind of mentions it in a way that makes me think maybe he didn't.
Yeah. So maybe he doesn't fully believe it, or he does in this moment of heated passion coming down from it and everything that's happened. Someone has died. Like all of this is happening at the same time. So this may not be the moment to get his honest feelings on something, right? So maybe in this moment, yes, he believes it because, again, he's defaulting to respecting the captain of the ship and saying, but But later, as he's had more time to think about it, because we know from the beginning he's an intellectual guy, maybe he's putting more and more of these pieces together, and then he starts to question Ramsay's actual commitment to doing what's right on the ship.
Would you run the drill?
No, sir, I would not.
Why not?
And he gives his very clear reasons.
Fire in the galley could have flared back up. I would have seen to it first, sir.
I'm sure you would have.
Which I personally believe that he believes that Hunter was responsible, and that's what he would have done.
I agree. I think Hunter, I think he believes that Hunter would have done that.
Yeah.
Whether he agrees with Hunter doing it is a different thing.
No, because he did something else.
Right.
Confusion on a ship is nothing to fear. It should be taken advantage of. Lest you forget, Mr. Hunter, we are a ship of war, designed for battle. You don't just fight battles when everything is hunky-dory.
Having read like all these, the Patrick O'Brien books and lots and lots of historical novels of military service, this is an argument that makes sense.
Sure.
Drilling within complicated, difficult situations is important but you have served, and so I will. But the argument makes sense to me.
It's a Hollywood movie, first of all, and so you have to put it through that prism. And the second part of this is that, yes, sure, there are elements of him that you find admirable in a leader, and I don't think that's an issue. The fact that he wants to run drills when people are unsettled, right? We see that all the time with, like as we mentioned earlier, with college football, right? You have those coaches who are throwing pads in while you're trying to run a drill or trying to get through the line. They want you to simulate what it's going to feel like to actually have people hitting you and knocking you off balance. And you've got to be able to be prepared for that in the game. They bring in speakers so they can pipe in how loud it's going to be in the stadium. So they're trying to prepare you for war. I do understand what he's saying. The fact that he feels the need to have this conversation with Hunter is the problem. Like, what would you have done? Would you have run the drill? Well, I'm a different man than you. And these are these things that feed the discontent between them. Again, he does not give Hunter his flowers at all for having done what he did, right? And so these are the little things that you see, these little microaggressions, I guess you would call, where he's just kind of making it very clear that he is a different person than Hunter over and over and over again. And so, yes, I believe what he's saying, but I don't know necessarily that that's authentically where he's coming from.
Well, the next line I think is really going to get to that. But before I get to that next line, it's just I think part
like
of
I see his logic if I thought he was a person who I believed was telling the truth all the time.
Right. Well, that's what I say. It's like the movie is different based on your assumptions and my assumptions. They're very different film. So the as far as bringing him into the quarters and having this conversation, 100% absolutely, the captain has to do that. You've had a conflict. It was minor. It was on the bridge. This is what leaders should do: is you go down and talk through it and explain what you need. I also think part of the job of a senior officer is to be a teacher and to say, this is because he could die next week and Hunter is suddenly the captain of the ship. Mm-hmm. And so explaining what his philosophy of being a captain is, I think is what captains should do. The next line is where we get into some other stuff because he says,
"What'd you think, son? I was just some crazy old coot putting everyone in harm's way as I yelled, yeehaw!"
See, that's where I'm really on your team in terms of like, that's where it's about his insecurity. It's about pushing Hunter. I agree with you.
Yeah. These are all these little things,
and Hunter gives a very controlled, just as the whole time he is going to respond to things in a controlled way.
Yeah.
That was not my first thought, sir. But there's no excuse. At the time I was fighting the fire in the galley, I did not agree with your call, sir.
I think that's him putting a little bit, because I agree with you. He did not get a single fucking commendation for his incredible bravery running in that fire. And I think this is Hunter going, dude, I was fighting the fire.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
And if anybody listening responds with, well, you don't have to stroke everybody. No, it's important to do that because
I agree.
Telling someone how to captain a ship is one thing, but commending them when they react in a moment of conflict in terms of the fire decisively and correctly is also another way of telling him how to run the ship. giving him the flowers for that is also confirming or reconfirming how to run a ship. So these are these things you can't do one without the other, and be seen as someone who is altruistic in their approach.
No, I agree with all of those things. He says, and again, this is where the hypocrisy of Ramsay really shows, in my opinion.
Just so we understand each other, I don't have any problems with questions or doubts. As I said to you before, I'm not seeking a company of kiss asses.
I think he thinks that's true about himself, but I don't think that's true.
No, everyone kisses his ass. So how could he say he doesn't seek the company of kiss asses? It's bullshit.
Well, and we've never seen Hunter or anybody else push back on him where he said, "Oh, thank you. That's a good point."
Yeah.
And then he expresses, I think, his philosophy.
Those sailors out there are just boys. Boys who are training to do a terrible and unthinkable thing. And if that ever occurs, the only reassurance they'll have that they're doing the proper thing is going to derive from their unqualified belief in the unified chain of command. That means we don't question each other's motives in front of the crew. It means we don't undermine each other. It means in a missile drill, they hear your voice right after mine without hesitation. Do you agree with that policy, sailor?
Absolutely, sir.
You don't like this speech?
Oh, no, of course not. All of it is bullshit. Because we don't undermine each other after I just ridiculed your educated ass in the dinner scene.
That's a fair point.
Bullshit. Like he's lying. He's lying straight through his teeth. And some of these leaders who are built this way push this nonsense and they think no one's going to push back on them. And he is saying and the fact that what do you agree with that? Sailor, not even saying his ranking, right? Sailor busts him down to just being a guy who can swab the fucking deck, And so these little, again, this dialogue is important. You have to, and I don't mean you, obviously, because we break these things down. But when you're watching movies, you're watching interactions, even simple little moments like this will give you a world of information about the way both of these characters think and what is going on in their conflict, the building conflict that is going to explode when Hunter relieves Ramsay of his command, and so it's these things. And I don't think if Ramsay hadn't done these little microaggressions and bigger aggressions, as we see later on, Steve, I don't think Hunter thinks to remove him from power. Like this is all he's accumulating intelligence on the situation before making the decision that he does in that critical moment. And this is another thing to go into the file.
So are you saying, this is a horrible way I'm going to ask this question.
Yes.
That Captain Ramsay's microaggressions actually save the planet? Because it's Hunter standing up to him that stops a nuclear war. And if you're saying that he wouldn't have stood up to him without these little microaggressions, then they kind of save the planet.
And I would not say it that way because that validates his behavior. So in some bass-ackwards way, yes, it worked out, but in no way should it be commended or lauded in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's funny. So to me,
Hunter relying on the intelligence and calm of a more complete person to make up for your incompleteness, and then you want credit for your incompleteness causing the trouble to begin with? No, zero.
So to me, I think Hunter would have done exactly the same thing regardless of, I think he's being objective, or I think he's being logical and rational about the decisions that he makes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they have to do with his feelings about Ramsay as a person.
Well, I don't think you can remove that.
Well, you're correct. Humans are like that, but that's just sort of what I see. On this speech, I agree with everything he's saying, and I think the difference between that these are boys that are trained to do a terrible, unthinkable thing. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
You agree that they're boys. These are men, adult men.
They're young men.
They're men.
Fine.
Those are men in there. I don't mean because here's the thing. It's not clear. So you might be right, Steve. He might be talking about the young guys who are down there who are about to argue about Silver Surfer and shit. Like he might be talking about those guys. But his guys in the dinner scene, those are men.
No, those are men. Absolutely.
With kids and families. Those are men.
Sure.
Right.
But regardless of the word boys, the idea that they're trained to do a terrible thing and that they need to have confidence in the chain of command in order to serve in this position, I agree with all of that. I also agree that a second in command should not vocally question the officer whenever possible in front of other people. you keep that shit out of the way of the rest of the crew.
Right. It goes both ways.
Yes. Where I think our difference lies is I see Ramsay as hypocritical, very hypocritical, but not a liar. No, and that's the sort of the difference. Is a liar knows that they're saying something that is untrue. Someone who's hypocritical thinks that I believe that he thinks he's willing to hear other people's opinions, but he's not.
You're right. Right. Well, okay. Yeah, I mean, because in my mind, you calling him hypocritical is you defending him to a degree. You don't want to see him as a potentially not evil, but certainly someone who allows his own personal beliefs and feelings to override logic. And his
he does. I think he does allow his personal beliefs and feelings to override his logic at times.
Right. And so, fair point. So, but I don't know if I've seen him as a liar. It's more a matter of like, he's a guy, he's a bully. I see him as a bully. And
I see
bullies are insecure. Bullies concoct narratives that make it seem like they're the heroes. And they do this and they step on other people in small ways and in big ways when the opportunities arise, And I don't, you just dismissing the word boys, I think is out of hand, because that is a clue to how he sees these people, calling them little ducks. Like, he has to see them as dependent on him in order for him to feel like the power guy on the ship. The captain, the fact that he has the rank of captain alone, it should be enough. But the fact that he needs to constantly portray these guys as needing his leadership and being boys and, childlike, infantilizing them is a way that a bully takes control of a situation. They can't do it. They need Papa Bear to show up and do it. And I don't agree with that approach to leadership.
But leadership is exactly what we're talking about here, because his next line is he says, we're here to preserve democracy, not to practice it.
Yeah. So he's basically saying that he's reiterating the fact that he does not want any free thinkers on his ship, right? This is how I see it. Of course, you and I might have a difference of opinion here, but he's basically saying that, like, we're here to defend democracy, but not practice it on this ship, because I am the end all be all. The buck stops with me. I am the captain. So you need to understand that. And I want to make it very clear to you, this is where I'm at. So I like the line. It's a very cute line and a forceful line. So I'm glad you pointed this out, because it gives you even more understanding of how Ramsay wants to rule this ship and wants to make Hunter understand that very clearly.
Do you agree with this line in terms of a military organization?
Yes, but I think it's already understood. Hunter is not some young lieutenant who just washed up on the shore like a second lieutenant. Like, this guy has been in the military for a while. I imagine that he's got his CV or whatever you want to say, his resume, his military resume. So he's well aware of who Hunter is and who Hunter has served with. So if it's a short list, as he seems to brag about at the beginning of the film, for people who are qualified to serve as an XO on his ship, I imagine he's done his research about this man. So he knows that the man knows how things are supposed to work on a ship. So reiterating this is an interesting decision to make, to underline it, because it isn't like he's been insubordinate rather this whole time. So it's just to kind of hammer the point home. And although I agree with him, I think it's unnecessary to say this to Hunter.
I agree with him 100%. Whether or not it's the timing of it is exactly right or what he's saying. I mean, that's where we get into this gray area. But I mean, it's like, there's some quote, and I wish I could name the episode, but there's some point at which Captain Kirk says something like, I'll take that under advisement as soon as this becomes a democracy. That like, when I'm directing a movie, I absolutely care about the opinion of my cinematographers, the actors, the screenwriter, everybody. I want to hear all that feedback, and it's not a democracy.
Right.
I am bringing on to myself, and I think this is what Ramsay is saying. He believes that he will listen to criticism, which I think we both said we don't see evidence of that.
No. Right.
But the reality is, this is a military vessel. He's the captain of the ship. This is not a democracy.
Yeah, but again, why does he need to say it? That's the thing. That's what you have to come back to, right? Steve, you're a writer. Why do characters say the things that they say? What is the motivation? What is the reason? Why does he feel the need to reiterate this with a man who understands hierarchy, understands the chain of command as an officer himself? Why does he feel the need to reiterate this right after the fire situation, right after the drill, and right after he's pulled him into his quarters and said to him, do you think I should have run the drill or not? Why the hell are you asking me if you're not going to be open with me having a possible different opinion about the situation? It's because he's testing him, you know?
Well, it's also because they have to do this absolutely horrible thing, and the chain of command is really, really important.
But
and
again,
that's what he's stressing
why
in
does
this
he
moment.
feel the need to say it, Steve?
Because he was being criticized. Because he was being
criticized
questioned on the bridge in the middle of a moment where he had to repeat his orders.
Mm-hmm.
And he has concerns about the most fundamental nature of their mission, which is that under stressful situations, he is going to need to repeat the orders to launch nuclear weapons. And so he wants to make sure that that is exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's a very safe and sanitary way to view Ramsay, and I completely disagree with you. He is doing this in order to keep Hunter under his thumb and make sure that Hunter understands who the hell the big dog in the yard is. That's how I view it. And there's no need to stress something to someone who absolutely knows what he's supposed to do in that situation. And if he's got a counter to what's going on because of the fire and all of that, it is because instead of hearing him out or talking, but once again, he does not ask him, how did the fire, what happened with the fire? How did you deal with that? Well, thanks for doing that. That's amazing. I ran the drill because of this reason. Are you okay? We lost a man. Like, let's focus on all those things. What does he say at the end of this scene? Give me 30 minutes. You know, it's these little things like, and I have to say, I'm really
What's
surprised
the problem with give me 30
that
minutes?
you like this stuff. I'm so surprised that you like
what is the problem with give me 30 minutes?
Well, because I think he's saying to him, like, don't bother me for 30 minutes. Like, give me 30. And he says all this stuff and then ushers him basically out of the room after he's essentially scolded him. And that's what he's doing in the scene. He's scolding him in no uncertain terms, which I think is offensive to a guy who's this high ranked in the military.
He's certainly saying don't bother me for 30 minutes, but he's saying it because he has to write the eulogy for a guy he's known for many years, and he wants private time to focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
He's not saying it to keep the guy down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay.
Yeah. Dude, we're not going to agree. We're just not going to agree on this because I think every little thing he does is to make sure people understand that he is the big dog in the yard. And it's very clear, even to someone like, it's really insulting that he thinks he needs to say it to Hunter. It's very insulting. You know, I mean, do you think a admiral should pull Ramsay into the office and say to him, you better understand the chain of command and how things work? It would be insulting to do that to Ramsay, who'd been on so many missions and so many ships. This guy is high up in the officer side of things. He knows exactly how it's supposed to work on a ship. But the XO is supposed to be able to tell the captain of the ship, hey, this is wrong, or you're not doing things right, or offer his opinion on situations. And I think this is what Ramsay is doing here is to try to make sure he doesn't feel that he has that right to do that. And that's undercut. He's actually undercutting what the chain of command is and what the jobs of all these people are in the hierarchy of the chain of command. The XO is supposed to have the ability to tell the captain, you're off on this, you're wrong on this, think about this, look at it this way. It is not supposed to be a dictatorship. That's the fallacy of the military. It is not a dictatorship. So many things have been avoided by people who are thinking a little more level-headed in critical situations than the person who's in charge, you know?
You know, I've said it before. I'm much more like Hunter. Ramsay is not my style.
I know.
But I also think that at any level, a superior officer, if there is a miscommunication or the behavior of their inferior officer isn't exactly what they want it to be, good leaders talk about it. That's what leaders do. Bad leaders ignore it, you know? And so, of course, he had to bring this guy in and have this conversation. I don't 100% agree with the way he did it, but I do believe that I agree with him that this isn't a democracy. Anyway, would you like to hear what our friends on the Submariner Reddit page said about this incident?
Yes, 100%, please.
They said, and there was a lot of people that agreed with it.
Okay.
That CO started a drill while the fucking boat is on fire. A shit bat insane. Ramsay shouldn't be in command of a pair of floaties and a snorkel, much less a nuclear submarine.
Yeah, man.
and I would say there was a fair amount of agreement on this point on the Reddit thread that this was not a good plan.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not surprised.
So I think that we've pretty much set the table, John, not only for conflicts between Captain Ramsay and Hunter about the future of nuclear war, but maybe some interesting discussions in our own future. So I think this is a good time to end part one of our deep dive into Crimson Tide. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts, because certainly John and I did not agree on this, and that's sometimes the most fun for us and hopefully for all of you. So what do you think about Ramsay's motivations and Hunter's responses to them? You could visit us on our Facebook page. Just do a search for the Cine-Files. It's Cine_Files on X, the Cine-Files podcast on Instagram. You can buy or stream Crimson Tide along with every other movie we've ever reviewed on cinephiles.net. You can support the show at patreon.com/thecine-files or Apple Podcasts, where you can get ad-free versions of the show as well as our Cine-Files shorts. And if you want to reach me, you can do so at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. John, how would folks reach you?
You can always reach me serving on the ship. No, you can always reach me at The Rocha Says, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, and Threads, and my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Rocha Says, to subscribe to be a part of the Outlaw Nation and all the stuff I got going on over there with all the great shows I do there as well.
And I think that's it for this week. We'll be back next time to continue our exploration of Crimson Tide on the Cine-Files.